Chapter 1. Unnamed Prisoner. In July 1991, black waves beat against the cliffs that held Azkaban Castle. Owls, having flown from the Scottish Highlands, arrived with Hogwarts acceptance letters sealed by the Quill of Acceptance. Others are sent from enrollment to imprisonment, raised on the path to a prison. I, however, was born pure prison, Rogge muttered as he swept the aisle with a broom. He had grown up here since he was a little wizard. No official status, not a registered prisoner. From the moment he woke, Azkaban had been his home, Hogwarts' forgotten fifth house, a so-called Academy of Advanced Wizardry. Outside the narrow window, a tired owl flapped its wings and, terrified by the Dementors hovering in the air, dropped a letter and fled. The bird landed on the sill, trembling, its orange-yellow eyes wide and puzzled. It could not understand why a little wizard would live here. Paul, the lone wizard administrator, was standing over a battered cauldron, stirring a blue-green paste that hissed and bubbled. "Damn the Ministry of Magic! Damn Millicent! Damn the Wizengamot!" he muttered, flicking his wand as he tried to coax the mixture into something useful. London never cared about this place. They dumped their problems here and refused to staff it properly or transfer anyone out. Paul had been left with the post forever. He even seemed unaware that Fudge was now minister. When Paul noticed the dropped letter, he jumped. He snatched it up and froze. An official Hogwarts acceptance lay in his hands. "Why this one?" he barked, then shoved it behind his back. He waved the little owl away. "Rogge, go find Jessica," Paul called. Rogge glanced at the tall grandfather clock and sighed. He had learned to read Paul's moods. "Lord Paul, are you serious?" he asked. "Of course," Paul said, forcing a smile as he hid the letter. He urged the bird away. 11 years earlier, Jessica and her husband Theodore had been hunted by Barty Crouch as suspected Death Eaters. To cover his tracks, Crouch had killed Theodore and, using the Imperious Curse, taken control of the baby Jessica carried. Believing the infant dead, Crouch had thrown Jessica and the child into Azkaban together. Rogge's transmigration, waking in this child's body, had given the baby life again and given Jessica a reason to cling to the world. At first, Paul had tried to do the right thing. He wrote to London begging them to take the child back. They accused him of delusion and mental illness and told him to mind his post, so Paul kept the boy. Rogge didn't cry or fuss. If he had, Paul might have been rid of him long ago. He was tolerated like a stray animal, fed, kept, but easily dismissed. Rogge set the broom against the wall and tiptoed down the corridor. At the passage's end, behind iron bars, was a small cell where Jessica lay curled on a straw pallet. "Lumos," he whispered, and a faint cone of light shivered into being, cutting through the damp dark. The weak glow traced the claw marks and gouges in the plaster, evidence of inmates who had gone mad beneath the Dementor's influence. "Rogge, you're here?" Jessica's voice was a rasp from the corner. She struggled to sit up, leaning on the cold stone. "Paul was in a good mood," Rogge lied, forcing a grin. "He let me come down early." Jessica's laughter was weak. "Don't stay long. There are Dementors everywhere. What happened to your hand?" Rogge lifted his sleeve. The skin was purpling where he'd been roughed up earlier that week. "It's nothing." Through the thin light, Rogge could see his mother's gauntness. Tears ran silently down Jessica's face. If she hadn't brought him in all those years ago, if she had left the child to whatever fate the Death Eaters intended, maybe things would be different. Guilt clawed at her. "I'm sorry, Rogge," she whispered. "Don't cry. If not for you, I might already be dead," Rogge said, squeezing her bony fingers through the bars. He had never known a proper home. He clung to this one. "You're 11 this year," Jessica said after a silence. "Can you use magic? Will you get a Hogwarts letter?" Rogge's stomach tightened. He knew the stories. Hogwarts sent dozens of letters. Professors sometimes visited Muggle homes to make sure a child received theirs. In his dreams, an owl might arrive for him too. "Hogwarts professors don't go to prisoners," Jessica said, the words cold as water. "They only visit Muggle families." Rogge swallowed. Of course they wouldn't come for them. He was an anonymous child here, an unnamed body among Azkaban's ruin. A dead Death Eater's son, forgotten and neglected. The thought filled him with a cold, stubborn resolve. If no letter came, he would find some other way out. He closed his eyes and the world narrowed to the panel that only he could see, his own private HUD flickering with stats. Rogge Travis magic power, 1.2, 2.3. Mental power, 12 talents, dark affinity, strong will, night vision. Skills, wandless casting spells, Lumos LV3, 36F50, Expecto Patronum LV1, 01. Below the readout, a round orange-yellow button glowed, Simulate Life. Rogge took a breath, poured 1 full point into the simulation, and watched the options spin up. Search the room for a wand and find your Hogwarts acceptance letter. 2. Paul tears up the acceptance letter, and you are locked in a cell. Insufficient magic power. Continue investing to simulate further outcomes. He had 0.2 magic left. His temples throbbed as he read the simulated threads. The acceptance letter had arrived. An owl had dropped it, but Paul had hidden it. The simulation suggested Paul would never willingly release them. Of course he wouldn't. The ministry had left Paul to do his duty indefinitely, and Paul had taken a twisted comfort in being indispensable. If they were to leave Azkaban, someone outside would have to force Paul's hand. Rogge pictured the likely candidate in his mind, a famous, influential figure in the magical world, with a spotless reputation and the clout to make Paul answer. Whoever it was would have to care, be motivated enough to drag Paul to the ministry and demand their release. Rogge crossed out obvious choices. Malfoy and the other pure-blood rent-seekers would not lift a finger for prisoners like them. He narrowed his focus, steadying the simulation like a lens until a single image began to form, a beautiful, imposing figure that matched everything he needed. Oh dear, the beginning already has a glaring plot hole. Changed. Chapter 2. Administrator's Desire. You damn Death Eaters! Get up and eat! Paul's heavy footsteps grew louder, his curses clearer with each cell. Day after day, he faced Dementors and a tide of hollow-eyed prisoners. The work had worn him numb. The keys at his belt jingled, and by habit he opened the little slot in the iron door. A few moldy pieces of bread sailed out of his pocket, landing in the cell. For those prisoners who hadn't yet given up their souls, Paul would humiliate them first with his nastiest words, then, as if obligated to charity, toss them a few more crumbs. He moved on, glancing at one of the prisoners, Rogge, with an inexplicable flare of anger. Why had this boy received an acceptance letter to Hogwarts while Paul, who had worked here for years, remained trapped? He had written resignation requests to London again and again. Each had been rejected. The reason was blunt and humiliating. He'd been a deserter during the war. If he didn't want to be punished, he might as well be the best administrator Azkaban had. Go clean the room. Wash my clothes. Paul's voice brooked no argument. Rogge lowered his head and slid along the wall like a shadow. Here, Paul was king. Make him cross, and solitary would be a mercy. Rogge pushed the broom into the office, which still smelled of failed potions and damp. He closed the door quietly and, hands trembling, slipped to Paul's desk. Among the old trinkets, rusted pocket watches and necklaces left by the dead, he found an envelope tucked all the way at the back. The front read, "To Rogge Travis, Azkaban Castle C2, North Sea." He opened it and read aloud under his breath. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Principal, Albus Dumbledore. Dear Mr. Travis, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A list of required books and equipment is enclosed. The term begins on September 1st. We await your owl by July 31st. Sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Before Rogge could hide it, the office door burst open. You damn little Death Eater, you little thief! What are you doing? Paul strode in, eyes bright with rage. His alert charm had been triggered. He'd smelled the change in the room. Accio! His wand flicked, and the acceptance letter whipped into his hand. You want to leave, don't you? To Hogwarts? Paul laughed, a cruel, wet sound. He tore the parchment into shreds right in front of Rogge. Then he stepped forward and slapped him hard. Rogge hit the floor. Blood spattered his lips. You'll stay here and behave, Paul spat. I raised you up from nothing. From today on, you won't see Jessica. I'll starve you for 3 days. Do this again and I'll feed you to the Dementors. Rogge swallowed a sob, trying to hold his hatred in. Sir, I have a way you can get out of Azkaban. You? Paul punched him again, grabbed his torn clothes and hoisted him by the collar. You have an idea? Fine, say it. If it's nonsense, I'll throw you in solitary. Paul scratched his scalp, thinning hair catching the dim light. Talk. Thrown back against the wall, Rogge steadied his voice. You can't go to the ministry and expect them to help, but there are people who can influence the ministry. Dumbledore? Paul sneered. You still want to run off to Hogwarts? Not Dumbledore, Rogge said quickly. Rita Skeeter. There's a copy of the Daily Prophet in your office. Paul snorted. Did your mother teach you to read? Owls stopped coming here 10 years ago. Rogge watched as Paul stalked to the shelf and dug out the yellowed paper. The masthead screamed the old victory over you-know-who. Rita Skeeter writes for the Daily Prophet. She's famous for stirring things up. Tell her the ministry has an innocent child locked in Azkaban, and she'll run with it. And then, Paul asked, unconvinced. In his mind, going to the Daily Prophet sounded like spectacle. I could write to Dumbledore and be done. Rita will make a scandal, Rogge said. The minister will be forced to act. Even if they don't, the story will sell. She'll pay well for a scoop. You won't need the ministry if you have a sack of galleons. Paul paced in the office, thinking. A quiet note to Dumbledore would be handled with discretion. If the ministry noticed at all, they might brand him a deserter for letting a child languish and throw him into the cells he ran. But sell the story, make a fuss. Money could buy him anything. Who would choose this place over a purse of galleons? The ministry, he thought, were too weak and greedy to come here themselves. Reparo, Paul murmured, and the torn acceptance letter knit itself clean. He stared at the Hogwarts crest, 4 quarters of color and beasts, the motto in Latin he loved to translate, never tickle a sleeping dragon. A sting of memory hit him. The Sorting Hat should have put me in Hufflepuff, not Gryffindor, he muttered. As a deserter, he felt more like a badger than a lion. He smoothed the yellowed parchment on the desk. He hadn't written letters in years. His hand was clumsy, and the ink came out crooked. He wrote fast, breathless with the thought of the uproar to come. A child, son of Death Eaters, but innocent, has been imprisoned in Azkaban by the ministry for 11 years. He has never seen the sun, has no new clothes, and has spent his life among Dementors. Paul's handwriting slanted and jagged, each line more dramatic than the last. He pictured Rita running the headline. This would be a sensation, he told himself. It would shatter the calm and send readers clamoring. He even muttered thanks to old contacts he imagined would help. Thank you, old Barty. Thank you, Headmaster Dumbledore. A bitter, private joke at Dumbledore's supposed omniscience. New students, he thought, were logged in the Book of Admittance and their acceptance notes transcribed by the Quill of Acceptance. Surely Dumbledore's hand must have signed automatically for so many. If Dumbledore had felt inclined, he would have come himself. When he was done, Paul handed the letter to his owl. He watched the small black dot of the owl vanish into the sky and felt a thrill of triumph. He propped his feet on the desk and idly played with the acceptance letter he had repaired, then tossed it back into the deep drawer. But if I'm going to make big news, he told himself, the little worm will need to be made to suffer some more. He reached for the keys with a slow, satisfied smile. Get up! He burst into the small, dim room and scooped Rogge into his arms. Sir, you, the watcher stammered. Heh, haven't you always wanted to see your mother, Jessica? I'll grant your wish. The man opened cell C2 and shoved Rogge inside. You and your mother don't need to thank me. He grinned and closed the door, then hurried off to find an owl to send a letter. Damn those little Death Eaters, he thought. What a hassle. After the war with you-know-who, the magical world had bled population and life. Diagon Alley, once humming and crowded, lay empty. Except for the seasonal bustle of new students arriving for term, it might as well have been abandoned. Rita Skeeter, smooth blonde hair, precisely arched eyebrows, and a taste for the sensational, spent her days scheming the next controversy to shake the wizarding community. Nearly 40, she polished her gem-encrusted glasses and set her luxurious quill in motion. The green quick quotes quill danced across the page, and soon a fresh scoop was coming off the press. People have lost interest in you-know-who's affairs, Rita muttered, tearing up another draft. The wastebasket beside her overflowed. She took her coffee cup and stood at the window, staring out at the deserted street, trying to think of a story that would make wizards talk again. Who? An owl landed on the sill. Rita fed it a treat and picked up the envelope. The handwriting was scrawled, likely from some out-of-the-way wizard she would normally dismiss without a second glance. But the wax seal read Azkaban, and that made her sit up. She smiled, peeled back the seal with red-nailed fingers, and skimmed the messily written letter. A letter from Azkaban could be gold. Nearly every wizard had held a friend or relative in that prison at some point. One or two human interest pieces exposing injustice and blaming the ministry would sell papers by the dozen. As she scanned the cramped handwriting, a clumsy sentence caught her eye. The writer, obviously not a careful reporter, had managed to imply that a child had spent 11 years in Azkaban. Rita's eyes brightened. Unforgivable, she thought. Absolutely unforgivable. By the next morning, a new Rita Skeeter piece had sparked outrage across the wizarding world. Headlined, "The Ministry of Magic's Secret. Have we created a new you-know-who?" The article did what Rita did best, turned righteous concern into a blistering attack. Just as the mural of scales and a wand in the ministry atrium stands for law and justice, so too do citizens expect the ministry to be a bulwark of righteousness. But when those symbols are shadowed by wrongdoing, can we still trust them? According to information I have obtained, prisoner numbers at Azkaban surged during the war. Disturbingly, this was not the result of fair trials, but of aurors taking the law into their own hands, locking wizards away in cold, damp cells without due process. During the war, such vigilante imprisonments were painted as heroic defense of our magical world. But is that any different from creating a new you-know-who through the abuse of power? I do not deny that criminals deserve punishment, Death Eaters and dark wizards included, but let us remember that you-know-who justified his tyranny with a so-called moral purpose. He offered no trial, no inquiry. Did that ever make him righteous? Stripping people of their rights breeds chaos and fear. Our protectors, the ministry and the aurors, must uphold law and justice, not abandon them in the name of security. A society that loses its sense of justice is more terrible than any dictator. Let us make justice our shield, not our sword. Only then can our world truly emerge from darkness and be strong enough to defeat threats like you-know-who. Otherwise, we may be paving the way for the next tyrant. Rita's piece, sharp and theatrical, accused the ministry and the Wizengamot of locking up wizards in Azkaban without trial. Officials who read it didn't rage so much as chuckle. The issue had been settled, they believed, and the accusation was melodramatic. Under Minister Fudge's orders, the minister's office drafted a response and released it the same day. Respected wizards, the Ministry of Magic has recently received concerns from citizens regarding reports that Death Eaters and dark wizards were imprisoned in Azkaban without trial. Upon review, it is confirmed that during the war, some aurors did bypass normal trial procedures and committed certain individuals to Azkaban directly. Given the gravity of this matter, the Ministry of Magic offers the following explanation. 1. The individuals directly committed were core members of the Death Eater organization, with conclusive evidence of involvement in multiple serious crimes that endangered the peace and order of wizard society. Their guilt was clear, and there was a high risk of escape and retaliation. 2. Due to the complexity and danger of Death Eater activities and urgent considerations for public safety, the ministry implemented special procedures for some key individuals, committing them to Azkaban immediately to prevent greater harm. 3. After the war, the ministry conducted full legal reviews of these cases and completed formal trials to ensure due process was followed. We will continue to uphold the rule of law and to safeguard the rights and interests of every wizard. Any lawbreaker will face appropriate punishment. We thank the public for their attention and welcome continued oversight. Let us work together to build a just and equitable wizarding society. Ministry of Magic and Wizengamot Joint Statement, July 2nd, 1991. Rita, perched on her magic carpet, smiled to herself. The statement was well phrased, authoritative, exactly the kind of official personage she loved to pick apart. "Temporary," she murmured. She waved her wand and the teapot floated over, topping off her cup. She pressed her lipstick to the rim of a china teacup and slipped the ministry's statement into her calfskin folder. Far away, Azkaban loomed on its storm-lashed island. Paul waited in the prison's high tower, eager and anxious, for the reporter who had come calling. When Rita arrived, he greeted her with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Miss Skeeter, welcome." He wiped his hands on his robes. "Mr. Paul." Rita removed her gloves and forced a handshake, her expression barely disguising her distaste. As Paul turned to give her a tour, Rita discreetly cast aguamenti and rinsed her right hand. A Dementor had drifted down the corridor earlier. The chill had left her uneasy. "With all due respect, Mr. Paul," Rita said, moving closer, "the Ministry and Wizengamot released a joint statement this morning." "An announcement?" Paul scratched his bald head. Azkaban was so remote even owls hesitated to fly here. He didn't always know what news had reached the mainland. "Yes, the Ministry claims they re-examined those cases. They say what you described in your letter couldn't have happened." "They're lying," Paul growled. He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope, the Hogwarts acceptance letter, waving it under Rita's nose. The Hogwarts crest shimmered in the dim candlelight as he held it aloft. Chapter 4. Call to God for protection. A letter can't mean anything. Maybe Headmaster Dumbledore is senile and wrote it wrong. Rita took the envelope and turned it over, inspecting it carefully. There was no mistake. It was an admission letter to Hogwarts. "I admit Dumbledore might be old, but he doesn't speak for Hogwarts. The Book of Admittance at Hogwarts never airs." Paul slammed his fist on the table, making Rita startle. "So what? Have you seen that child? In a place like this, Death Eaters go soft, let alone a baby. From what I've seen, the child called Rogge was under the Imperious curse." Rita's voice was calm as she probed for more. I, Paul stammered. Of course he had seen the boy, and had disciplined him. His eyes flicked around nervously. He couldn't risk revealing what he knew to the world. If he did, he wouldn't be remembered as a kindly Azkaban administrator, but as a man who mistreated a child. "Miss Rita, his name is Rogge. I swear, he grew up healthy here in Azkaban. His mind is normal. He even learned to read with his mother tutoring him." "Rogge, Mr. Paul, a single name won't convince anyone. It's like saying John or Tom and expecting it to make headlines." Rita smiled thinly. "We need a last name." "Wait, Miss Rita, I have a staff list. I can find his surname. I can prove he's not on the prisoner roster." Paul blurted, flustered. Why hadn't the boy ever given him his last name? He pulled a thick, dust-smudged ledger from the shelf, too nervous to bother with a spell. Rogge. He scanned the pages, his finger tracing line after line. There was no child listed as Rogge. "See? He's not here." Paul grinned triumphantly, certain he had exposed an illegal detention. He opened his mouth to crow, and Rita cut him off. "Just because my name isn't in the book, does that mean I'm illegally detained by the Ministry?" she said, folding the ledger and looking at him with a cool, superior smile. "Don't you know she was brought in with her mother?" Rita said with disgust. Paul's expression soured. In his eyes, the woman and child were troublemakers, a reputation he was all too eager to preserve. Right, Jessica," he said, trying to remember. "Found them. Jessica Travis and Buck Travis," Rita read aloud, flipping a few pages with a clean, practiced hand. "Both Death Eaters who followed you-know-who." Rita flicked a cleaning charm across the battered ledger and turned it so Paul could see. "The Travis family is all in Azkaban. No wonder the Ministry swears every prisoner was properly vetted." She tapped the page with a quill, already composing the headline in her head. "The Ministry of Magic and the Dementors' Sinister Deal." "Miss Rita, what do you mean?" Paul asked, bewildered. Rita's eyes glittered. "Use your head. Most of those who followed you-know-who were pure bloods. Travis, haven't you heard of the Travis family?" "I know of them. One of the Sacred 28, Paul answered slowly. "A family with centuries of history and an enormous fortune. If Malfoy hadn't paid compensation back then, do you think he'd have been acquitted? The Ministry of Magic." She let the rest hang in a laugh. "And Barty Crouch back then," Paul began. "Barty Crouch Jr.? Maybe because his misdeeds cost his father his position as Minister for Magic." Rita's tone was acidic. Old Barty wouldn't even pay a galleon to save his son. His reputation mattered more than anything. Paul remembered. Old Barty had been instrumental in sending Jessica and her boy to Azkaban. Perhaps it was karma that his own son had become a Death Eater. Barty Crouch Jr. had died, the conversation confirmed, long ago. Rita turned page after page with a strange, hungry delight. The roster was a map of secrets, and she was relishing every discovery. Her skin flushed warm with the thrill of it. "Mr. Paul, let's go see the new student from Azkaban, in the name of Headmaster Dumbledore." She shook the Hogwarts acceptance letter with a bright, predatory smile. Her excitement drew the attention of the nearby Dementors. Their cold, hollow stare made her want the story all the more. "Miss Rita, we should." "Don't rush," she said, taking photographs as she moved. She snapped the bleak corridors, the iron-barred cells, and even Paul himself, who turned beet red at being on film. I should change my robes," Paul muttered, mortified. He hadn't had his picture taken in over 10 years. "The film's almost out," Rita said, pocketing the camera. "Save the rest for Jessica and her son." "Of course." Paul nodded so fast his head nearly wobbled. A couple fewer pictures was a small price. They walked the corridor in a hush. "The place is awful. Please don't mind it," Paul mumbled, ashamed of the stench and the damp. "It's nothing," Rita replied. As an illegal animagus who had spent time as a beetle, she had seen worse. A pale light caught Paul's eye. "Strange, there's light," he whispered. It shone from the door of the cell at the end of the passage, Jessica and her son's cell. Rita put a finger to her lips and signaled him to keep quiet. Paul frowned. "But their wands were confiscated. There shouldn't be any light." "Maybe it's magic without a wand," Rita suggested. "That's impossible. Dementors suck out the soul. They can't cast spells at all," Paul said, voice tight. "Shh." Rita slid forward to the door and motioned for Paul to open the little grated window. On the narrow cot inside, Jessica held her son close. They spoke in low, urgent tones about the future, about hope. The quiet warmth of their conversation drew the Dementors like flies to carrion. The faceless creatures drifted close, filling the cell with hunger and cold. Rogge gripped his mother's hand and stood between the monsters and her. A silvery white light burst from him like a shield, a shining barrier that the Dementors recoiled from. Rita's breath caught. "Expecto Patronum," she whispered to herself and reflexively raised her camera. Light showered the corridor as she snapped the Dementors receding, the lens catching the spectral glow, banishing them. Rogge watched the creatures fade away, then slumped unconscious into Jessica's arms. Jessica cradled him, humming to him in a small voice. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." The lullaby was softer than the wind through the bars. It was the first time Rogge had called her mom, and she soothed him like any mother would, hands gentle on his hair. Rita felt something prick behind her eyes. She stepped away from the door and dabbled at them with a handkerchief. She had to do something for them. She tapped on the cell door. "Who's there?" Jessica whispered, startled, and pulled her son closer. "Jessica, don't be afraid. My name is Rita Skeeter. I write for the Daily Prophet. May I help?" Rita's voice was low and oily with charm. "Rita?" Jessica peered through the grating, recognizing the name with a flush of memory, a woman known for turning truth into headlines. "It's me. Do you recognize this?" Rita held up the Hogwarts letter. "Your son's acceptance. You'll need a story, public support, to get out of here." Jessica fell quiet, listening to the reporter's pitch. She remembered the letter coming from Paul and the look in his eyes. She understood how desperate he had been to leave. She glanced at her fragile son and then through the foggy mist to where Paul and Rita stood. The offer sounded like rescue and like bait. "Yes, but you cannot photograph my son," Jessica said firmly. "Of course." Rita's smile faded a fraction. She had wanted that face for the front page. The silver light had blurred his features, and she'd hoped for better photos. For now, though, the story mattered more than a picture. Chapter 5. Reports that shock the wizarding world. At Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall was once again going over the list of newly admitted students. Most of the children came from pure-blood or half-blamleys, but a few came from Muggle households and required extra attention. To Muggles, wizards were still the stuff of fairy tales. A letter delivered by an owl could be dismissed as a prank. For that reason, Hogwarts professors often visited Muggle families in person to secure consent. Professor Snape, head of Slytherin, was not, of course, suitable for such visits. In the Transfiguration classroom with McGonagall were Bathsheba Babbling, the ancient runes instructor, Charity Burbage, Muggle Studies, Professor Grubbly Plank, substitute for care of magical creatures, and Madam Hooch, who taught flying. "Professors," McGonagall said, placing the list on the table, "here are this year's new students. Please check for any problems among the children you're responsible for." There were fewer than 50 names, shorter than a lazy essay. Excluding those from wizarding families, each professor was responsible for at most 2 Muggle-born or Muggle-raised students. Hooch, reading the list in her usual bottom-to-top fashion, frowned. "Could this be wrong?" she said. "Rogge Travis, his address is listed as Azkaban in the North Sea. That can't be right." "Travis?" McGonagall's face hardened. "Buck Travis." She smelled the name like one might smell something burned. Buck Travis was a Death Eater, a murderer who had killed members of the Order of the Phoenix. "It may be only a coincidence," she added quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. Before anyone could reply, Professor Sprout burst into the room, mud still clinging to her robes and her face flushed with agitation. "Have you seen the paper?" she asked, breathless. They crowded around her. The Daily Prophet lay open on a desk, its front page taken up by a headline printed in huge, bold letters. "Little Star of Azkaban, a Hogwarts new student." Below it was a moving photograph, magically captured, a small figure standing in the cold, dark interior of an Azkaban cell, a silvery Patronus pushing back a looming Dementor. In the next instant, the child collapsed into a woman's arms. A caption beneath read, "A child who has never seen the sun." Rita Skeeter, for all her methods, was a formidable reporter. This piece read like a calculated, glittering indictment. If her past articles were sensational, this one was a full-throated assault. Every paragraph landed like an accusation against the Ministry of Magic, and by extension, Headmaster Dumbledore, whose signature, the article insisted, must have been on the Hogwarts acceptance letter found in Azkaban and now displayed in the paper. The piece accused the Ministry of trampling rights, likened its conduct to the worst abuses of the past, and painted the child as an innocent crushed by institutional cruelty. "They use the language of equality to trample law and justice," Rita wrote. "They seize dissenters, brand them as fanatics, and throw even their infants into Azkaban to be drained by Dementors. If the soil is not cleansed, only evil will grow." Teachers filled the Transfiguration classroom until nearly every seat was taken. Everyone wanted answers. "Is this true?" they asked McGonagall, eyes fixed on her and on the enrollment list that lay on the table. McGonagall removed her glasses, wiping them with a quill-turned handkerchief. "Do not be overcome with alarm," she said, steadying herself. "Headmaster Dumbledore has gone to the Wisengamot to address this matter. Hogwarts will protect every student in our care." At the Ministry of Magic, Cornelius Fudge's office looked as if a storm had passed through it. He paced and fumed, red-faced and furious. "That witch! She set me up," he shouted to anyone within earshot. Rita's article had surfaced less than a day after the ministry's own announcement, and it struck like a slap across the entire department. Fudge was convinced there was a deliberate campaign against him. Outside his office, ministry employees crowded the corridor, bickering over the article's veracity. Percy Weasley, ministerial secretary, pushed through and seized Dolores Umbridge. "Dolores, Rita's story is fabricated, isn't it?" he demanded. Umbridge's expression was pale and serious. No, she had already been in the archives, checking old files. "If this is true, how could an infant stand up to the unforgivable curses?" she said. "Imperio, Avada Kedavra, these are not things a baby survives. If the child was brought to Azkaban, how did he grow up?" "It was old Barty who acted. Barty Crouch," Percy blurted, remembering rumors. "He wasn't known for mercy toward Death Eaters." "Who can say?" Umbridge replied, shaking her head. "Even those we relied upon were not always beyond harm." Janice, one of the minister's aides, arrived and gently steered Percy aside. "The minister hopes former minister Millicent Bagnold will make a public statement," he said. "It may calm the situation. He also feels that Headmaster Dumbledore and Barty Crouch bear some responsibility." Janice took the papers from Umbridge's hand and motioned for Percy to resume his duty at the department's fireplaces. In both Hogwarts and the Ministry, the same questions circled like restless ghosts. How had a child ended up in Azkaban? Whose authority had allowed it? And what, if anything, had been signed in the name of the school or the state? As the day darkened, the wizarding world found itself shaken, waiting for answers, and for the story to turn. Chapter 6. Reactions from all parties. The whole ministry knows this is impossible. Of course, I'm not surprised the minister thinks otherwise. Janice's voice was low and clipped. He had served under Cornelius Fudge for years and could read him like a book. The man wanted to deflect blame, but he had no idea how dangerous that deflection could be. "Percy, everyone knows Azkaban is a cesspit. During the war, countless innocent witches and wizards were sent there. You don't just rip off the lid and disgust the public because someone thinks they smell a stench. Now Rita, she sets herself up on some moral pedestal and throws a bomb from a safe distance. We're left scrubbing while she takes the praise of the whole wizarding world. We can put you-know-who's death at Dumbledore's door, at the Savior's, Janice continued, voice hardening. But don't forget, when the magical world was on the brink, it was former Minister Millicent who stepped up. He retired early with his reputation intact because of what he achieved. Percy, do not drag him into this. Percy shifted, uneasy. The minister can't be covering for this, he muttered, despair edging his tone. There's nothing lost, at least not yet. Did you see the file? Janice flipped through the papers with a growing frown, then pulled one sheet free. Look at this. He tapped the heading, the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes Deployment Report, dated July 1, 1980. Winchester, suspected to have been hit by a Soviet nuclear missile. Percy's breath caught. Memories he had thought long buried stirred at the mention of that day. Theodore's Lumos, he whispered. It's his doing, Janice said. The report shows Theodore used Lumos to flood Winchester with light to cover Jessica and the child's escape. Janice clicked his tongue. I never thought anyone could use a basic charm so skillfully. Theodore was a genius in his own way. Pity his opponent wasn't a run-of-the-mill Auror, but the fiercely righteous Barty Crouch. That battle had real, visible consequences for Muggles. It was true. Cold War tensions were at a peak. The blinding white light that enveloped Winchester was visible to satellites. Muggle observers feared Britain had been struck by a nuclear weapon, and Europe was thrown into panic. If Cornelius Fudge, then head of department, had not personally intervened and coordinated with various authorities to minimize the fallout, the Muggle world might have tipped into war again. Official inquiries found Winchester to be normal with no trace of radiation. Professors at Oxford and Cambridge declared the white light an extraordinarily rare natural phenomenon. BBC and ITV ran those findings. And in the ministry's quieter rooms, memories were sealed and smoothed over. We covered it up, Percy said, the old guilt still in his voice. I helped with the memory wiping operation. Janice snorted. Imagine what Rita would do if she saw this file. She'd scream that Fudge used an innocent baby to ladder himself into the ministry. He imitated a shrill headline, squeezing his throat to mimic the reporter's rasp. If this touches former Minister Millicent, mark my words, this report will be in Rita's office before our kettle has time to boil. The grate in the atrium flared green. A tall, thin man stepped through the flue with his usual rigid reserve. Barty Crouch Sr. had once been a candidate for minister, but had been sidelined after his son's fall. He had been moved to the Department of International Magical Cooperation. His position still carried the mantle of authority, but everyone in the room knew it was a promotion in name only. People hurried aside as he entered. No one wanted Barty's scowl to land upon them. Percy, Janice said sharply, if Headmaster Dumbledore arrives, take him to my office. Then, before Percy could answer, Janice followed Barty into the minister's office, which looked like it had been ransacked in the scuffle earlier. Dolores, Janison, Albert, stay, Fudge barked, waving the others out. The remaining four were his closest confidants, the core of his department loyal to him personally. Barty, Fudge thundered, as soon as the two men were quiet enough to be heard across the wrecked furniture. I order you to take personal responsibility for this outrage. He slammed a hand down, eyes aflame. Who do you think you are? Some member of the Order of the Phoenix, acting on your own to avenge the Travis and McKinnon families, throwing them into Azkaban without trial, even a baby. You have the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the Wizengamot lying to you. Everyone is lying to you. Fudge spat. Even my own office. Our Aurors are a pack of despicable cowards, striking down mothers and children. The accusation came hot from Fudge. It hung in the room like acrid smoke. Barty Crouch answered, voice icy. Minister Fudge, I will not have you insult the Aurors of my department. The old man's jaw was rigid. The baby's fate, at least as the ministry's present knowledge went, was already assumed. Fudge leaned in, fury sharpening his words. I almost forgot you were Barty Crouch, so righteous and sanctimonious. Was it you who used Imperius on an innocent baby? Was it you who shipped them off to Azkaban without trial? You always said ending the war was urgent. You let Aurors use the dark arts against you-know-who and the Death Eaters. In the end, you used them on a child. You are a disgrace to the Ministry, a disgrace to the Aurors. Barty was cut off for a moment, then the sound of his retort was as cold as a winter stream. The two men leaned toward one another, their faces almost touching, the wards on the door trembling under the force of their anger so that even the corridor beyond echoed with the clash. Percy stood by the fireplace, feeling small and adrift in the surge of accusation and old grievances. When he saw the tall figure of Albus Dumbledore step into the atrium, he moved quickly to his side. "Headmaster," he said. Dumbledore lifted a hand in his calm, habitual manner. "I know everything," he said softly, and then crossed into the room where voices were higher and tempers were hot. A fresh commotion came from the other end of the foyer. The Floo burst into life again, and a company of well-dressed men followed Lucius Malfoy as he swept into the Ministry with his usual assured air. He and the other representatives of the pure-blood families had come prepared to seize any advantage this scandal might afford them, hoping to reclaim standing they had lost during the war. "Headmaster Dumbledore," Lucius purred as he bowed slightly, his smile a practiced thing. "Thank you for your owl. Just had it not been for you, we would not even have known the Travis line survived. That child is brave, worthy of our respect." Dumbledore inclined his head, gentle as ever. "I believe what matters most is not blood, but character. Everyone present here, I hope, is guided by kindness and a sense of justice." Malfoy's lips tightened for a fraction of a second, as if Dumbledore's answer had not quite landed the way he intended. He recovered smoothly. "For kindness and justice. How admirably put, Headmaster. The Travis child is certainly an excellent match for a pure-blood house. He survived Azkaban bravely. It may interest you to know that Ilvermorny and Beauxbatons have already extended offers to Mr. Rogge." "That is wonderful news," Dumbledore replied, genuinely. "No matter which school Mr. Rogge chooses, I am pleased for him. A child of good heart deserves the best education. I believe he will become an excellent wizard, not because of his name, but because of his character." Lucius's expression darkened. He had hoped the news of foreign offers would rattle Dumbledore and gain leverage. Instead, Dumbledore's composure only deepened. In a lower, gruffer tone, Malfoy pressed his point. "The board, however, has its views. Some on the school board feel that Hogwarts ought not to give up such a pure-blood descendant lightly. If Mr. Rogge enrolls elsewhere, there will be those who question Hogwarts' teaching philosophy. Of course," he added smoothly, "we all know Hogwarts is the finest school. With a little persuasion, Mr. Rogge will surely remain here. On that point, I suspect most of the British wizarding community would agree." Malfoy fixed Dumbledore with a steady stare, watching for any flicker of change in the headmaster's expression. Chapter 7. "Hello, Dumbledore." "What you say is not without reason," Dumbledore admitted. "I will consider your suggestion. But as we agreed before, the most important thing is to respect the child's own choice. Hogwarts' doors are always open to peace-loving witches and wizards." Malfoy glared for a moment, then smoothed his expression. "You are right. As a graduate of Hogwarts, the Malfoy household's magazine, Wizard Warfare, is prepared to lend its support." Dumbledore narrowed his eyes, thinking for a moment. "Thank you for your offer, Mr. Malfoy. Now let us go see Minister Fudge. The first priority is to get the child out of Azkaban." Dumbledore knew this incident would send ripples through the community. The pure-blood faction, led by the Malfoys, would not let an opportunity to undermine the Ministry pass. He stepped into Fudge's office and frowned at the cluttered furniture. "Reparo," he said quietly. "Albus, you're here." Minister Fudge exhaled with relief at the sight of him. His shoulders relaxed a little. "The important thing now isn't assigning blame. It's rescuing the child. By every account, he's innocent." "And what if the report is false?" Fudge clung to his last thread of stubbornness. "If the Ministry acknowledged that report and it turned out to be wrong, he would be the first to suffer, vilified by the wizarding world and possibly forced from office. Even if there's a 1 in 10,000 chance he's guilty, we can't risk bringing an innocent child into that place." Dumbledore's voice was earnest. "Trust me, launching an immediate investigation is the wisest course. If the report is true, we can correct a grave mistake, If it's false, we can allay panic and anger. The point is to act, not to hide." Fudge fell silent, weighing the options. An aura burst into the office then, breathless. "Minister, new development. We've received word from the Azkaban administrator. He confirms the boy is still alive." Fudge's face changed as hope flickered and was snuffed out in an instant. After a long moment, he sighed. "Very well, Albus. We must act. I'll arrange a team to go to Azkaban at once. If the child is alive, he should be transferred to St. Mungo's immediately, and we'll conduct a full inquiry to determine how this injustice occurred." A relieved smile spread across Dumbledore's face. "We should go ourselves. This concerns a child's life." "You're right. I'll prepare the flu now." Fudge gave a conspiratorial wink to his special assistant, Albert. The situation was already in motion. He might as well stage a public rescue to burnish his image. Soon, Dumbledore, Fudge, Malfoy, and others were en route to Azkaban. Rita Skeeter had not left. She watched the arriving party with avid interest, taking pictures as they materialized at the prison. "Madam Rita, thank you for your report," Fudge said quickly as he approached her. "Your article saved a child, corrected an error, and showed the professionalism a journalist should have. Your courage and contribution deserve recognition, a Merlin Order." Rita's eyes widened. A Merlin Order, an honorary medal given for service to the magical community. She hadn't expected such a prize. It dawned on her quickly why Fudge was offering it. A medal would be an easy way to placate her, to curb further digging. A small alteration to her copy, and her name would be on the honors list. "Minister Fudge, I merely did what was right," Rita said, warm and public. "There may be darkness in our world, but justice prevails. Justice can be delayed, but eventually it triumphs over darkness." "You're right, Madam Rita. Leave the rest to the ministry. We will investigate thoroughly and release our findings promptly." "Justice delayed," Rita repeated with dry amusement. Fudge's chubby face beamed with gratitude. "At that time, I hope Madam Rita will grant an exclusive." "Minister, you have my word. I will do a fine exclusive." The understanding passed between them in plain sight. Everyone present tacitly accepted the arrangement. They listened to Paul recount the story of Jessica and her son, then made their way into Azkaban. "Rogge, they're here. Do you remember what Mama taught you?" Jessica heard movement in the corridor and looked at her son with a seriousness that made her voice tremble. "Mom, I want to take you out with me." Rogge's voice was steady. If it were only for himself, he could have waited years to escape Azkaban. But Jessica was weak. Staying would mean death for her. "Listen to me and go to school," Jessica urged, shaking her head. She had little hope she'd leave Azkaban alive. Her best chance was that her son could be freed. "No," Rogge said stubbornly and turned his face away. A translucent interface flickered into Rogge's view like a mental status panel, evidence of the strange overlap between his abilities and whatever protective magic he harbored. Rogge Travis Magic, 2.3, 2.3, Mental Power 12. Talents, Dark Affinity, Strong Will, Night Vision Skills, Wandless Casting, Lumos LV3, 3650, Expecto Patronum, LV2, 010. He sighed. His magic was barely sufficient. If he used the simulation function, he would lose the chance to execute his plan. There was nothing more to do than gamble. For himself and for his mother Jessica, he would stake his life without hesitation. Rogge stood, and he summoned his happiest memories, the brightest things he could recall. They were fragments from a previous life and the beautiful life he had imagined sharing with Jessica. The dark aura around him shifted. Every pore seemed to radiate joy and warmth. That joy was a blazing point of light in the abyss, and the Dementors of Azkaban raged around it, desperate to extinguish the source. "They're coming! Rogge, what are you doing?" "Stop!" Jessica cried, horrified. "Trust me," he said, gripping her hand. As the Dementors surged into the cell, his voice carried an irresistible force. Expecto Patronum. A silver light erupted before him, insubstantial yet unbreakable. It formed a shield that held back the frenzied Dementors. Outside, the faces of Minister Fudge and Dumbledore went grave. Rita, attuned to the drama, raised her camera and started filming as she sensed the moment's significance. Dumbledore glanced at Lucius, who quickly offered an explanation. "Albus, we have no need to intervene. Our interests align where this child is concerned." Dumbledore's gaze swept the scene. Fudge and old Barty were already casting defenses to hold the Dementors at bay. None of them had motive to harm the boy. Then Dumbledore lifted his elder wand. Expecto Patronum, he intoned, and a vast silver-white phoenix burst from the tip. It soared, wings spread, a magnificent and consoling sound rolling over the prison. The phoenix's cry was full of hope and warmth, driving the maddened Dementors away. Dumbledore pushed open the cell door. The silver light around Rogge still gleamed. Everyone present gaped. Rita, watching the scene unfold and filming, was stunned even though she had seen evidence before. Only now did the others accept what her pictures had hinted at. An 11-year-old boy had cast wandless magic and summoned a Patronus. Even among Aurors and the best graduates from Hogwarts, only a handful of witches and wizards ever mastered the rare art of wandless magic. Far fewer could manage it well enough to produce a Patronus. Expecto Patronum is one of the oldest and most powerful forms of magic in the wizarding world. Rogue's Patronus had been incomplete, only a vague, phantom shape. But given the conditions of Azkaban and Rogue's youth, everyone present was stunned by the display of raw talent. Cornelius Fudge felt nothing but regret. Had he known sooner that Azkaban held such a gifted child, he would have gone to any lengths to correct the error before it came to this. When Dumbledore and his party arrived, Rogue knew his gamble had paid off. He sagged, exhausted, into Jessica's arms, a tired smile on his face. "All right, child. The Dementor has been driven off," Dumbledore said gently. He waved the Elder Wand. Brilliant light poured through the cell, drying and brightening it. "Miss Rita, I don't think Rogue should be put in the papers," he added, fixing the reporter with a sharp, commanding look. "Aye, of course," Rita sputtered, quickly muttering incendio to burn the negatives she'd taken to ash. Protecting their privacy, always the priority. "Child, your name is Rogue, isn't it? Come with me." Dumbledore extended a hand, his face kind. "Headmaster Dumbledore, I don't think Hogwarts is the best place for Rogue right now," Lucius Malfoy said, stepping forward. He regarded Jessica and offered them another option. Jessica glanced at Dumbledore, then at Lucius, eager to say something, but Rogue spoke first. He held his mother's hand and refused to look at either man. His eyes drifted past them to where a sullen Cornelius Fudge stood. Rogue, who knew the original course of events all too well, understood what Dumbledore's offer meant. Distance from pure-blood circles, possible recruitment into the Order later, and nothing but a polite apology from the Ministry in the end. 10 years in Azkaban had transformed him from infant into fragile teenager. He had known terror and numbness every day, watched his mother weaken until standing and walking had become difficult. Dumbledore loved Harry Potter, Rogue realized, and choosing Dumbledore would make him just another instrument at someone else's side. He hated living at the mercy of others, hated being a hero's adjunct, hated the idea that he might be called on to sacrifice himself for another's glory. As for Lucius Malfoy, Rogue detested him outright. Pure-blood prejudice filled the man's narrow mind, and his association with the Dark Lord only proved folly had overtaken cunning. "I must choose my own path, for myself and for my mother," Rogue vowed silently, staring at a startled Fudge. "Clever child," Lucius said, approving. As a pure-blood, he knew how to read advantage even in youth. Fudge's expression crumpled. If it were only Rogue leaving, he would not have objected whether the boy went to Hogwarts or Malfoy Manor. Either would be preferable to keeping them in the Ministry's care. But Jessica was listed as a Death Eater. By the book, she could not be released from Azkaban. Split the mother from the child, and Fudge knew he would be forced to flee the Ministry the next morning amid public outrage. He fumbled for a solution until his assistant, Albert, tugged his sleeve and whispered in his ear. Fudge brightened and stepped between Dumbledore and Malfoy. "Gentlemen, what Jessica and her son need most now is medical care. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries is the proper place," he said. Granting a prisoner medical parole was procedurally sound, and no reasonable wizard could criticize it. "Headmaster, I don't think their condition is suitable for apparition." "I brought a flying carpet." "Miss Rita, you know flying carpets are prohibited in Britain," Malfoy snapped, and Rita could only pout, making a mental note. Seeing Dumbledore hesitate, Malfoy gave an ostentatious smile. "The House of Malfoy has a magical ship in the North Sea we can use." Dumbledore considered, then relented. "Mr. Malfoy, a magical vessel would be most appropriate." Lucius sent for a wizard and gave a few curt instructions. Soon a magnificent magical ship glided up from the waters, a tall-masted vessel painted with the Malfoy crest, regal and far from a mere transport. It rode the waves steadily as Azkaban shrank behind them, swallowed by fog and sea. In the cabin, Dumbledore performed what he could. He murmured, "Vulnera senenter," their wounds and the worst of their bruises closed. Aguamenti rinsed away the grime. Episci eased swelling and tenderness. He produced a crimson restorative potion and fed it to both Rogue and Jessica. The ache in Rogue's body eased. His spirits recovered a little. "Thank you, sir," Rogue said, offering a weak smile. "Child, this is only the beginning. True recovery will take time," Dumbledore said kindly. "But knowing you're safe is a great comfort." The ship passed through mist and clouds. As the shore came into view, a golden shaft of sunlight pierced the sky. Rita's new report had already been filed and sent. The story captured the wizarding world's attention and sold out as soon as it hit the stands. "We sail home," the headline read. On the storm-tossed sea, a Malfoy ship bore them toward St. Mungo's. Rita's copy called it a testament to life and love. A poor boy and his brave mother finally known to the world, their plight revealed by Warden Paul's help and Dumbledore's swift intervention. The Ministry had acted. A grave miscarriage of justice had been corrected. The voyage, Rita wrote, was a hymn to life and hope, proof that when justice is served, humanity shines brightest. Word spread quickly that the mother and son were at St. Mungo's, and owls bearing gifts arrived in droves. The hospital staff, overwhelmed by goodwill, were grateful, but they also reported that both patients were to be discharged once stable, and those who had rushed gifts left with mixed relief and regret. Rogue and Jessica were installed in one of the hospital's top-floor private suites, rooms funded by large endowments, the most luxurious among them coming from the Malfoy household. The ward had been stacked with presents, but at Rogue's request they were returned, one by one. "Rogue, how is your recovery?" Lucius Malfoy asked with a smile when he came to visit. The man's tone was smoothly cheery, but an edge of calculation showed through. He had used Roger and his mother as a pretext to rally the pureblood families against the Ministry of Magic. The Ministry was in the process of reclaiming the influence and privileges it had lost after the last war, and Malfoy had already made significant progress in pushing back. "Much better, Uncle Malfoy," Roger said, leaning back against the pillow and staring at the green grass under the sun. 11 years. He had finally left that dark prison. The bright sunlight and the scent of freshly cut lawn made him feel completely at ease. "The lengthy preliminary procedures are finished. Tomorrow you'll have to attend a meeting," Malfoy told him. "A meeting?" Roger blinked. He had already entrusted most things to Malfoy. "About your mother," Malfoy answered, glancing at the unconscious Jessica. He admired her. She had been an exceptional mother. She'd done everything to keep Roger alive in Azkaban and had taught him the basics: language, wandless magic, even the Patronus. But as a political actor among the pureblood families, she was, in Malfoy's view, painfully naive. If Roger hadn't restrained her, she might already have signed a ministry letter of understanding under their manipulations. If mother and son renounced their claims for compensation, Malfoy's coalition of pureblood houses would lose the excuse to press their case. They could not regain power and privileges without leverage. "The ministry is willing to offer compensation," Malfoy said, "but they insist on re-examining your mother's innocence." "Re-examine?" Roger snorted. "When have they ever examined us? What right do they have now?" "Don't get worked up." Malfoy's voice was silk over steel. "This is a struggle between the pureblood houses and the ministry. Go to the meeting. Watch and listen." "Uncle Malfoy, a group for the pureblood families? We could form our own organization?" Roger asked. Malfoy smiled at how quickly the boy could pick up an idea and make it his own. He laid a stack of books on the bedside table. The Sacred 28 Families, A Tangle of Power, History of Magical World Families, The Sacred 28 Families Explained, Prominent Families in the History of Magic. Everything a young pureblood heir might need to soak in the lore. The 28 are a shadow of what they once were. Someone has to step forward at this critical moment. He leaned on his silver-headed wand, chest proud. "If the remaining families don't learn to unite, we will be picked off one by one." The direct lines of the House of Black, the crouch line, the gaunts, they're all but extinct. Their glory is only in yellowing book pages. He let the point hang in the air. If it hadn't been for Paul's letter, I'm convinced the ministry would have marched a Dementor through the gates and fed the last of the Travis line to them, he said menacingly, driving home how much the families owed him. He wove pureblood doctrine like thread into Roger's young head. Goblins were a warning. The wizarding ascendancy had been taken from them. Mercy was betrayal. The defeated must lose everything so the future would be safe. Roger pretended to nod. He understood the value of aligning with power when it suited him. Uncle Malfoy, why don't we just form an organization to speak for our interests? He repeated. Delighted at the boy's initiative, Malfoy began to outline the dangers. The wizarding world, still wary after you-know-who, would turn on any openly organized pureblood body. He was tempted by Roger's suggestion but couldn't appear too eager. You-know-who's failure set everyone on edge, he said finally. We must be cautious. Roger touched a book to his left, one that didn't belong to Malfoy. What about the Order of the Phoenix? He asked. The book had been sent by Dumbledore and explained the wizarding world and even muggles. Malfoy's face hardened. He'd fought against the Order, and he despised Dumbledore, yet here was the young Travis knowing about it. He snorted at the pile of books Dumbledore had sent. The old fool's generosity is not as simple as it looks, he muttered. Roger, however, had started to read more than pure-blood manifestos. It's a pity you-know-who failed, Malfoy said with a sigh that was mostly for himself. If Potter had not lived, but history offers no ifs. Roger surprised him again. I don't think anyone wants bloodshed. We just want to protect ourselves. Why can't we learn from muggles, their parliamentary systems? He asked. Learn from mudbloods? Malfoy's shriek betrayed him. He saw Dumbledore's hand everywhere and read Dumbledore in every challenge. Roger frowned at the word but kept his temper. It was 1991. It wasn't the Dark Ages. Roger had an unshakable sense that any people with rifles, cannons, great ships, airplanes, and even nuclear arms would be pragmatic about power. He picked up another book, Muggle Political Studies, and smiled. Those countries that grew strong through war, whether wizard or not, have things worth learning, he said. At an altitude of 186 miles, human satellites circle our planet. They call it outer space. Humans have walked on the moon, not by magic, but by what they call technology. For a moment, Malfoy was silent. He had always looked down on Muggles. Now the same Muggles had machines that traveled to the moon, and his world had been left staring up. With a curt word, he left the ward. Jessica woke as Malfoy departed. She sat up slowly and looked at her son in astonishment. He'd changed so much, grown far faster than she'd imagined. Roger, do we really have to ally with Malfoy? She asked. Mom, is the dark mark still on your left forearm? Roger asked instead. She touched the skin under the hospital gown and nodded. There's no choice, he said. They accuse us of caring only about bloodlines, but what about them? They locked us away, pushed us to the margins. Our name carries the stain of Death Eaters. Whether it's fair or not doesn't matter. When other students at Hogwarts find out, they'll call me a Death Eater's brat anyway. Jessica gripped his hand tightly. She had imagined freedom would fix everything. She had not foreseen being made a political pawn or the fear that followed them. It was an unusual morning. Professor Dumbledore, someone she hadn't seen in a long time, had come by, accompanied by Professor McGonagall, her square spectacles as severe as ever. Miss Jessica, Master Roger, how are you both feeling? Dumbledore asked, his silver beard trembling as he smiled at them. He noticed the stack of pureblood tomes on the table and frowned faintly. Much better, thanks to everyone's care, Jessica answered, relieved at the headmaster's presence. Splendid. Dumbledore withdrew 2 envelopes from his robe. I think it's time for Master Roger to make a choice. Jessica and Roger exchanged puzzled looks. What is it? They asked. These are invitations to Ilvermorny in the United States and Beauxbatons in France, Dumbledore said. Both are excellent schools of magic. Although the Hogwarts acceptance was sent a long time ago, considering the circumstances at the time, I think Master Roger should have the right to choose. Chapter 10. Rogge's Choice. Sir, is this the letter? Rogge carefully took the paper from the drawer. After such a long journey, the acceptance letter was crumpled. The envelope's edges were scuffed, The pages bore black smudges, and the corners were bent. "Yes, this is a Hogwarts acceptance letter," Dumbledore said, nodding. "You kept it all this time?" "Yes, sir." Rogge's face flushed with a mixture of pride and awkwardness. "If we hadn't had it, my mother and I might still be fighting Dementors in Azkaban." Rogge and Jessica exchanged a look, and without hesitation chose Hogwarts. Rogge barely glanced at the other two invitation letters. A joyful light flickered in Dumbledore's eyes. Rogge's decision made the whole affair feel properly settled. Reparo. With a small wave of his wand, the wrinkled sheet smoothed out and looked as good as new. Dumbledore smiled kindly. "Do not worry, child. The Ministry has made a decision. Azkaban will be reinforced with more Aurors for oversight, and those who were wrongly imprisoned will be released with all charges dropped. They will learn from this. Laws and procedures will be improved to ensure justice and to prevent such tragedies in the future," Dumbledore continued. "You and your mother suffered an injustice. I am sorry, but I believe there is hope ahead." "Thank you, Headmaster." "Mum, do you want to hear it again?" Rogge asked. "Of course." Jessica hugged her son, kissing his cheek with fierce relief. Rogge opened the letter and read every word aloud without skipping the appendix. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore. Dear Mr. Travis, students may bring one owl or one cat or one toad. Parents are reminded that first-year students are not permitted to bring their own broomsticks. Congratulations, child, Dumbledore said warmly. Hogwarts awaits you. There you will meet friends who share your heart and learn one of life's truest magics, the magic of friendship and love. That's wonderful. Mum, once I learn magic, I can help you relax, Rogge said, tugging at his mother's sleeve. In the motion, the dark mark on Jessica's arm was briefly revealed. Jessica, is that? Dumbledore's expression changed. He leaned forward to look. It's my fault, Jessica whispered, shame washing over her. She quickly drew her sleeve down to hide the mark. The fact that it's there shows how badly I erred. People make mistakes, Dumbledore said gently, but you chose to turn away from them. That shows the courage and kindness in your heart. That is what matters. Mum can't sleep because of it. Please help her, Rogge pleaded, pulling lightly at Dumbledore's robe. His big eyes shone with earnestness. What a kind child, Dumbledore said, smiling. Jessica, I will do my best to help rid you of this painful reminder. He drew his wand and stepped closer. This may be a little uncomfortable. Please bear with me. Jessica nodded and rolled up her sleeve. The dark mark, a black skull with a snake, lay stark against her fair skin, a terrible remnant of a terrible time. Dumbledore closed his eyes and began a quiet, intricate incantation. The mark twined, shivered, and slowly faded. Jessica bit her lip, sweat beading on her forehead, until at last the mark dissolved into a small puff of smoke and vanished. She exhaled the first real breath of relief she had been able to take in years. There, Dumbledore said, smiling. It will trouble you no more. Thank you, Headmaster. I am so grateful, Jessica said, her voice thick. The removal of the mark did not erase the fact that she had once been a Death Eater, but it gave her something she hadn't had in a long while, the courage to face the future. I believe you will begin again and be a good mother and a good witch, Dumbledore added. If you don't mind, Professor McGonagall can escort young Rogge to Diagon Alley to buy his school supplies, Dumbledore said, looking to Jessica. Many witches and wizards are asking to meet our little star. That would be wonderful. Thank you, Headmaster, and Professor McGonagall, Jessica answered. Azkaban had taken much from her. Her body had yet to recover completely. Rita Skeeter's article had not included Rogge's photo or name, but Jessica herself had been named, and many in the wizarding world would recognize her. She didn't want Rogge to carry the weight of Azkaban any longer, nor to be the center of unwelcome attention. She wanted nothing more than for him to grow up healthy and happy. Little Rogge, are you ready for Diagon Alley? Professor McGonagall asked. Rogge was a small, frail child. Years in Azkaban had stunted him. He was thinner and paler than children his age. His skin was almost moonlit from lack of sunlight, but his handsome bone structure still showed through, a prominent nose, hollowed cheeks, and high cheekbones. Dark hair fell in a soft fringe across his forehead. His black and white eyes were clear and bright with intelligence and resolve. He wore a slightly oversized black robe, its sleeves and hem pinned to keep them from puddling, and despite his frailty, there was something about him that hinted he might one day be a pillar of the wizarding world. Dumbledore watched McGonagall and Rogge leave and grew thoughtful. Seeing the mark on Jessica's arm had once again reminded him of Voldemort's lingering presence. He felt a cold unease at the thought that the Dark Lord's power might not be gone. The Dark Mark still holds his influence, Dumbledore murmured to himself. Voldemort is not entirely gone. He is somewhere, gathering strength, waiting for the chance to return. We must remain vigilant, steady morale, and prepare in secret, he added, his brow furrowing. The forces of darkness are gathering and will soon re-emerge. And that prophecy. Mrs. Jessica, there will be a hearing at the Wizengamot tomorrow, Dumbledore told her gently. I will ensure you and Rogge receive the justice you deserve. You have suffered enough. You will have fairness and recompense. Thank you. I am eternally grateful, Jessica said sincerely. I must be off now. Rest and try not to worry, Dumbledore said with a small smile. Don't worry, Headmaster. I'll take care of myself, she replied. Jessica watched Dumbledore step into the hearth. Green flames licked around him, and he vanished from the room. Outside on the street in London, Professor McGonagall led Rogge to an old carriage. They were bound for the Leaky Cauldron. The pub sat on Charing Cross Road, tucked between bookstores and record shops, and carried a charm to repel muggles. McGonagall held Rogge's hand and pushed open the worn wooden door. The Leaky Cauldron, she said softly. This will take you to the entrance of Diagon Alley. Oh, Professor McGonagall! Old Tom poked his head from behind the bar. He had the shiny bald head common to many British wizards, and his eyes were the gray-blue of someone used to seeing many kinds of trouble. Is this the new student, then? He said with a warm chuckle, coming forward. Hagrid's bringing someone as well. You might see him in Diagon Alley. Chapter 11. Hello, Diagon Alley. Hagrid? Professor McGonagall hesitated for a moment. She clearly remembered he wasn't among the staff collecting Muggle first years this year. Yes, with our savior, Mr. Harry Potter, Old Tom said, his voice low and excited. Suddenly everything clicked for Professor McGonagall. Of course it was Harry. We'll keep an eye out for him in Diagon Alley, she said. Then she turned to Rogge. Come along. It's time to get your textbooks and a wand. Rogge had heard Harry Potter might be in Diagon Alley today, and had been tempted to engineer a chance meeting. You never knew what might happen around the boy everyone called a savior. Then he thought better of it. Where Harry is, Lord Voldemort won't be far behind, he told himself, and decided his modest 2.3 in magical ability wasn't worth showing off. Could Harry drift about like a Dementor? Better not. Bidding Old Tom farewell, Professor McGonagall led Rogge to the little courtyard at the back. 3 bricks up from the dustbin, then 2 across. Tap them with your wand, she instructed, taking out her wand and showing him how to open the entrance to Diagon Alley. Tap 3 times. Rogge knew the routine, but watching the hole in the wall widen still filled him with the same wonder he had felt at Hogwarts. The gap grew and grew until an arched passage was revealed. At the end of the passage, Diagon Alley lay before them. Professor McGonagall, what if someone moves the dustbin? Rogge asked. Good question, she said approvingly. There's a restoring charm on that dustbin. If anyone moves it, it will simply return to its original place. I see, Rogge nodded, and she went on. Besides, ever since the entrance was set, no one bothers to move the dustbin. Every witch and wizard who uses it knows it's the way into Diagon Alley. And even if someone did move it, we could still get in another way, through the Leaky Cauldron's fireplace with flue powder. Wizards always find a way. The first thing that drew Rogge's eye in Diagon Alley was the crooked white building at the center. Gringotts. Rogge, that's Gringotts, our wizard bank, Professor McGonagall said, pointing. It's run by goblins. They keep wizards' gold, silver, and other valuables. Run by goblins? Rogge's eyes widened. Aren't they afraid of theft when wizards aren't watching? The Ministry and the goblins have absolute confidence in it, she replied. Gringotts uses the most advanced anti-theft magic. Things kept there are extremely safe. Do they keep magical artifacts there? Rogge asked, hopeful. Some old and valuable items are stored there, but mostly it's gold, silver, and important documents, she smiled. For instance, the Hogwarts Fund has a vault at Gringotts to provide a set number of galleons each year for students from Muggle families until they graduate. She looked at Rogge. Given your situation, the school board has approved a grant of 100 galleons for you. That much? Rogge's eyes widened, but he politely declined. Professor McGonagall, thank you, but I've already borrowed my tuition from Uncle Malfoy. He pulled a bulging money bag from his robe. It was heavy and made no sound, no matter how he shook it. What Uncle Malfoy loaned me should be enough. McGonagall's expression tightened. She had never trusted the Malfoys. Child, it's not my place to say, but Malfoy's help may come with strings. Have you really thought it through? Rogge smiled. Don't worry, Professor. I'll use the money properly. I expect the ministry compensation to come through in a couple of days. She nodded, though reluctantly. Most of the school fund's donations came from the same house in other ways, but a direct loan from Malfoy was different. Very well. If you've decided, I respect your choice. We can postpone opening your Gringotts vault. Let's buy robes and a wand first. Although Diagon Alley had more upscale shops, most parents insisted on Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. Madame Malkin's school robes were warm and had self-repairing and ironing charms. She normally avoided selling robes that automatically adapted to a student's size. A garment that could last 7 years would ruin her business, unless a customer specifically requested one and paid the extra price. Professor McGonagall, I didn't expect you to bring a first year in person, a round-faced witch in deep purple called out. Madame Malkin bustled over. She was a little short and plump, all bustle and bright eyes. After a few pleasantries, Madame Malkin showed Rogge the Hogwarts first-year robes. Come on, dear, let's have a look. She frowned at how thin he was. The smallest robe from the rack was roomy on him. No wonder his Muggle clothes had to be pinned. This won't do. Shrinking charm. She waved her wand and the robe visibly shrank. It fit his shoulders, but the sleeves and hem were too short. My dear, I don't have suitable ready-made clothes. The robe, the pointed hat, the gloves, even the cloak will need to be custom-made to your measurements. She produced a tape measure that hopped onto Rogge and began taking measurements by itself. Would you like a cup of tea while you wait, or shall you come back later? Madame Malkin asked, noting his measurements and sighing softly at what he must have been through. Can it be ready today, madam? Rogge asked, watching his thin arms. Of course, she said. How about Professor McGonagall takes you to get your other supplies? Come back afterward, and the robes will be ready. All right, madam. I'll leave it in your hands. Don't worry, I'll make them well, Madame Malkin promised with a smile. Off you go now. Choose your wand and your books. I'll work quickly so your uniform is ready on time. I imagine a wand won't need to be remade for your size, Madame Malkin added, and everyone laughed. Professor McGonagall led Rogge to the very end of Diagon Alley to a narrow, cramped, and ancient shop. In the dusty window, a wand lay on a faded purple cushion, and the paint on the sign above the door had peeled with age. Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. The bell over the little shop door jingled as Rogue followed Professor McGonagall inside, announcing their arrival. The wand shop was even more crowded than in the films. Boxes of wands teetered all the way to the ceiling, and the floorboards complained under their feet. Minerva McGonagall, if I recall, your wand is fur, dragon heartstring core, 9.5 inches, the white-haired man behind the counter said with a smile. Your memory is impeccable, Mr. Ollivander. McGonagall replied, I've brought a new student, Rogue, to be fitted for his wand. Oh, a new student! Ollivander's eyes brightened. Come, young man, let's see which wand chooses you. He produced a ruler and methodically measured Rogue's arm length, forearm, height, head circumference, everything. Rogue glanced helplessly at McGonagall. This was the second round of measurements today, and Ollivander's were far more thorough than Madame Malkin's. Mr. Ollivander, he said, I'm only a child. Do these measurements really matter? Of course they do, my boy. Ollivander's voice was eager. Wand lore is a complex branch of magic. To find the wand that will best serve a wizard, I must take note of the user's physical characteristics. Your body will grow, but your proportions and bone structure reflect temperament and aptitude. These measurements help me select the right length, flexibility, core. Each detail is important. He scribbled down Rogue's dimensions. A wizard must see the essence through the appearance. Don't worry, we'll find the wand that's most suitable for you. Reassured, Rogue nodded. He had 2 lives, in a manner of speaking, and the idea of finally owning his own wand filled him with anticipation. Using Rogue's measurements, Ollivander brought out several boxes. Try this one first. Hawthorn, Phoenix Feather Core, 12 inches, reasonably flexible. Rogue took it and gave it a flick. Only a faint puff of cold air answered. No, not quite. Ollivander shook his head and handed him another. Cherry, Dragon Heartstring, 10 inches, very sturdy. Rogue waved that wand, and a vase in the shop exploded with a bang. My vase, Ollivander chuckled and shook his head. Never mind, that one's not right either. Over the next few minutes, Rogue tried wands made of boxwood and yew. Some did nothing. Others produced chaotic effects. Ollivander muttered, indeed a picky customer. Don't rush. I have one you may be very compatible with. He took a new box from the front shelf. Holly, Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, flexible, he said, and Rogue's heart gave a skip. He recognized the description, Harry Potter's wand. He wondered, half amused, if he'd somehow grabbed Potter's. McGonagall smiled encouragingly. Wave it, Rogue. The wand will choose its wizard. Rogue obliged, but the holly wand lay obediently quiet. Ollivander frowned, puzzled. He scratched his white hair, then crouched and reached for a box on the very bottom shelf. He lifted out a unique wand, sandalwood, 12 inches, spiraled, elegant. Its core was something Rogue had never heard of. Ollivander said it plainly when he handed it over. Cheelin Heartstring, he announced. The moment Rogue wrapped his hand around it, a dazzling golden light flared, sparks blossoming through the shop. Ollivander beamed. Excellent. This is the one. Sandalwood, Cheelin Heartstring, 12 inches, very sturdy. McGonagall's eyes widened. Did you say Cheelin Heartstring? She asked, tension in her voice. Minerva, calm yourself, Ollivander said, raising a hand. This Cheelin Heartstring is not Newt's, and it has nothing to do with Grindelwald. It came from the carcass of an adult Cheelin legally supplied to me by the Ministry of Magic 60 years ago, completely above board. Let me explain. He turned the wand in his hands as if showing off a fine instrument. Sandalwood is uncommon, and I sourced this piece from the Far East to complement the Cheelin core. It suggests an owner with firm will and noble aims. The spiral design symbolizes continuity and endless possibility. In Eastern tradition, the Cheelin is auspicious, a symbol of peace. A Cheelin heartstring grants remarkable protective and healing properties. 12 inches is a balanced length, good for those who seek harmony. Ollivander inclined his head. To be honest, this wand was not fashioned strictly in our tradition. I made it, but it seems to have been waiting for a wizard from the East. It is sensitive, adept at complex spells, a fine blend of flexibility and strength, suited to someone agile, adaptable, inventive. McGonagall nodded slowly, still uneasy about the rarity of the core, but there was no denying the wand's bond with Rogue. Magic flowed through it effortlessly, trailing fireworks from its tip. Rogue gripped it happily. Thank you, Mr. Ollivander, he said. I'll use it well. You're welcome, my boy. Ollivander smiled. Rogue produced a small leather pouch and set down a full bag of galleons on the counter. Thank you for your trouble, Mr. Ollivander. This wand is precious. No need, Ollivander said, waving him off. He only pocketed its 7 gold coins. That will do. I believe this wand will be a good companion. Take it away and try it out. If you have any problems, come back to me. Rogue tucked the wand carefully into his pocket. McGonagall led him out of the shop, pleased. Mr. Rogue, congratulations on obtaining your wand, she said, adjusting her glasses. Now your first lesson. She explained the ministry's regulations briskly. Children who discover they are witches or wizards after the age of 11 but have not yet enrolled at a school are strictly forbidden from using magic outside school. Their wands may be confiscated and kept until they enroll. Rogue's face fell. Professor McGonagall, please allow me to keep it. I promise I won't use magic outside of school. He thought of movies where Hermione fixed Harry's glasses before they were all formally enrolled and wondered why the rules were so strict in practice. McGonagall listened, expression unreadable, and continued her lesson as they walked toward the street, the new wand warm and promising in Rogue's pocket. Chapter 13, Bad Goods Store. No. Professor McGonagall shook her head. Seeing Rogge's tear-filled eyes, she softened. All right, Mr. Rogge, you can keep the wand until we leave Diagon Alley. Understood, Professor McGonagall. Rogge nodded quickly. He didn't argue or question whether the old rule was real or a ruse. If Professor McGonagall wanted to check the wand and its origin, he would simply lend it to her for now. McGonagall seemed satisfied. Very good, the wand issue is settled. We still need to buy first-year textbooks, potion supplies, and astronomy equipment, and you may bring one pet to Hogwarts. That's great. I want to bring an owl. Rogge brightened at the thought. Then I can write to my mother even when I'm at school. McGonagall smiled. Owls are an excellent choice. They help students stay in touch with their families. You'll find them loyal and reliable, one of a wizard's best friends. Next to Ollivander's was a shop simply called the Second-Hand Shop, stacked floor to ceiling with old items, broken chairs, worn wands, dog-eared textbooks, faded robes, and even a few scruffy magical pets. Flourish and Blots and Patches Potions sell brand new textbooks and equipment, but they're expensive, McGonagall said, pointing to the second-hand store. You might consider this place. The items are older, but much more affordable. Rogge thought of the price of textbooks in his previous life. Brand new ones were outrageously expensive. The cost for a semester could run into thousands. In that world, the second-hand market flourished. Shops and photocopy businesses thrived. It seemed the magical world was no different. No wonder Harry and Hermione had hunted for bargains here. If he remembered correctly, Harry had money, and Hermione came from a muggle middle-class family. Even they felt the pinch. He checked his money pouch. It was 1991. The Soviet Union's 819 incident was looming, and he was still thinking about ways to turn that into profit to get ahead in London's financial city. The Ministry of Magic was still negotiating compensation, and it could be a long time before any money reached his account. Bureaucracies dragged their feet in every world. Better to save where he could, and leaving a good impression on Professor McGonagall couldn't hurt. Professor McGonagall, I'd like to go into the second-hand shop first, Rogge said cautiously. Maybe I can find some used textbooks and supplies that are in good condition and reasonably priced. McGonagall didn't know his exact reasoning, but she approved of his thrift. Very responsible. Looking for suitable materials in a second-hand shop is a useful exercise. Let's go. The owner was an old wizard with white, frizzy hair that looked like a nest ruined by fireworks. His cloudy gray-blue eyes darted about the shop as if afraid someone might walk off with a broomstick. He didn't look friendly, but he was eager with customers. Professor McGonagall, long time no see. Hello, Elvin. I've brought a new student. Do you have anything suitable for first years? McGonagall asked. She had a long memory of this man. His personality matched his name, petty and calculating. Of course, high-quality used goods, Elvin announced, beginning to pull volumes and implements from the shelves. This elementary transfiguration is only 2 sickles. The cover's a little worn, but the pages are intact. He tapped a book. See? The ink's clear. The illustrations are all there, perfect for beginners. There are notes from the previous owner, and between you and me, the last owner was a witch. McGonagall coughed and shot him a look. Elvin's shamelessness went on. I'll sell you this cauldron for 5 nuts. It's a bit blackened from past fires, but it's the right size. The thickness is even. He picked it up and tapped the base. Sounds solid, doesn't it? Worth every nut. I can do quills and parchment cheaper, he continued, taking out a few pens and a thin stack of parchment. That bottle of ink's still half full. The whole set, 10 nuts. Need robes? I've got some second-hand ones, 20% off. Good fabric, no rips. He brushed off a few black robes to prove it. Elvin chattered on and on while Rogge stood by, unable to get a word in. Before he could react, a teetering pile of books, assorted cauldrons, and faded robes was stacked at his feet. And these old wands, all inspected by me. Pick any you like. Not a bit worse than Ollivander's. Most of them were made by Ollivander anyway. A quill jar full of old wands landed on the counter in front of Rogge. He froze, a little overwhelmed. Elvin's non-stop sales pitch left no room to think. The display towered at his feet, and the proprietor's enthusiasm was relentless. Professor McGonagall watched him with quiet interest. From their first meeting, Rogge had seemed more composed than most children, thoughtful beyond his years. But in front of Elvin, the child in him finally showed. Rogge, McGonagall said calmly. Elvin's place is cluttered, but there are some useful things here. Take your time and choose carefully. Don't be cowed by his excitement. Check the quality and think about what you actually need. There's no need to buy everything. Elvin brightened at the professor's endorsement, but when she added her caution, the shopkeeper's face flushed. He took her warning as a hint that the young wizard shouldn't splurge in his shop and forced a smile. Elvin always puts a lot out at once. One must learn to choose what suits one. My prices are exceptionally reasonable. A sudden bang from the direction of Gringotts cut him off. The whole of Diagon Alley shuddered. What was that? People cried, spilling out into the street. A plume of black smoke rose from around Gringotts. Professor McGonagall's eyes narrowed. She saw goblins raising wards, anti-apparition charms, around the bank. That signaled something serious indeed. I'll go look over there. Don't be shy. Take your time. If you find something you like, buy it. This is a good chance to practice, Professor McGonagall said with a wink, gesturing for him to browse. Roger watched her retreating figure, then turned toward Gringotts in the distance, where black smoke was curling into the sky. Quirrell must have blown open the vaults, he thought, gripping his wand as a cold knot of unease tightened in his chest. Ever since Harry Potter had arrived at Hogwarts, Lord Voldemort seemed to have stirred again, and trouble had followed. The first year had been manageable, with Dumbledore watching most of what happened. By the second year, Voldemort's followers were becoming brazen. Other young wizards had died. He wasn't Harry. Dumbledore wouldn't be watching out for him. He couldn't and wouldn't rely on others for his safety. He glanced at his magic rating, 2.3, and drew a slow breath. I need something to boost my power, he thought. Young man, the shopkeeper Elvin said, handing him a penholder and leaning close enough to whisper, Professor McGonagall said that, and I'm sure you'll make good use of these. Old practice wands, for example, only a galleon. No ministry monitoring. You can practice as much as you like. When you get to Hogwarts, while the other first years are still fumbling their spells, you'll be casting them perfectly, Elvin went on, already picturing the sale. Professor will give points to your house. The head of your house will be proud. People call you a prodigy. Even the little witch will admire you. Mr. Elvin, I can do wandless magic. Lumos. Roger flicked his finger, and a pinpoint of light sprang into being over Elvin's hand. Elvin rubbed his eyes in disbelief. You're only 11? Is wandless magic very difficult? Roger asked, his big honest eyes fixed on the man. Elvin sighed inwardly. Wandless magic was an advanced skill, he thought. It was supposed to be taught later. He tried to recover, sounding impressed. No wonder Professor McGonagall brought you herself. I haven't seen her escort a new student to buy things in years. Roger's casual modesty grated on him. Years in Azkaban had left Roger with visible and hidden scars and only 2.3 points of magic power, but his talent was undeniable. He could raise his spell's level endlessly through practice. Given time, an aguamenti cast by him could flood a planet, and his simulation skill let him peer into futures that touched him. He remembered that Ginny found a Horcrux in a bookshop once. If he could find Tom Riddle's diary, he might speed his progress. He scanned the shelves of used books, flipping through titles. He knew the Potter plots only in fragments. Tom's diary had been in Malfoy's hands at one point. After a careful search, he came up empty. He shrugged. Tom's Horcrux wasn't essential. It would only help accelerate learning. Mr. Elvin, how much for these? Roger asked, having collected books on potions and ancient runes. Potions to increase his power, runes to probe at the lost magics of the world. He also picked up the 2 first-year textbooks he'd need before term, the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, and a Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. That would be enough for now. Elvin's mind ran through prices as he looked at Roger's pile. He calculated quietly and aloud, smoothing his tone into the practiced patter of a seller who was doing the buyer a favor. This advanced potion making is very old, at least 10 years. I paid 3 sickles for it. Selling it for 5 would still be a tidy profit. 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. Good condition. 8 sickles, fair and not too cheap. Ancient runes made easy. No one asks for these. I bought it for 1 sickle, but I can ask 3. Ancient runes and hieroglyphs, I'll put that at 7 sickles. These are rare finds. Study of runes, for instance, is something even the Hogwarts library doesn't have. Roger interrupted. Just give me a single price for everything, the first-year textbooks and the stationery. All right, all right, Elvin cleared his throat. You found 10 books, all rare and excellent. For Professor McGonagall's sake, I'll give you a discount. 5 sickles each, so that's 50 sickles. 8 first-year textbooks and the usual supplies, quills, parchment, ink, will be 25 sickles altogether. And the cauldron set you wanted, crystal, copper, and tin pieces, that's 30 sickles. The glass potion bottles are 2 sickles. A brass scale set is 10 sickles. The telescope is 20. That's a subtotal of 137 sickles. You can't carry all of that, can you? I'll include a backpack with a permanent extension charm at a special price, 15 sickles. Round total, 150 sickles. He added, as if helping, you know the exchange rate. 1 galleon is 17 sickles, and 1 sickle is 29 nuts. I know, Roger said, so 150 sickles is 8 galleons and 14 sickles. Elvin smiled like a man who'd just closed the deal. Roger, however, shook his head and pointed at the stack of worn books. These are old stock, at most a sickle apiece. If you won't take that, I'll wait until term starts and see if I can borrow them from the school library. Elvin's expression changed as if someone had stepped on his tail. He seized on one title, The Advanced Potion Making, and spoke loudly, hoping to shame the boy into buying. A brand new copy of that book costs 9 galleons. Roger set the book aside without a flicker of hesitation. Fine, put it back. No, wait, Elvin blurted, catching himself. He knew that advanced potion books had a very small buyer market and were hard to move. If he let this one go for a sickle, he'd lose money. He hurried to smooth his voice into compromise, eager to keep the sale and not let these rare books walk out the door. Chapter 15, Magic Zoo. All right, I'll give you a discount. Elvin ground out, deciding it was better to sell the books cheaply than let them gather dust. 3 sickles each, or 10 for a package deal, no less. 20 sickles, the boy countered. They haggled until, in the end, the 10 books were sold for 25 sickles and 16 nuts. Elvin halved the prices on the remaining items as well and watched the boy across from him tremble. No way, brat. If I can't sell these this year, I can wait until next. Elvin shook his head. At most an 80% discount. I won't sell for a nut less. Rogge prodded at Elvin's bottom line. The potion bottles haven't been cleaned inside. The scales haven't been calibrated. I don't even know if they'll work. That set of astronomical telescopes? That joint is rusted solid. It won't budge. He stopped there, not pushing the price lower. Reparo, make it new, Elvin snapped, waving his wand. The minor issues Rogge mentioned vanished as if by magic. Now what, brat? Elvin glared. 80%, Rogge said calmly. Elvin ran the figures through his head. 80% on these items comes to 69 sickles and 17.5 nuts. Add the 25 sickles and 16 nuts for the books. Total, 5 galleons, 10 sickles, and 4.5 nuts. He was old, but his head for numbers was still sharp. Not a nut would slip by. Reluctantly, he accepted the bargain, already calculating the profit margin. Change. Rogge produced 6 galleons and began stuffing the purchased items into his undetectable extension bag. Elvin swept the galleons into the drawer with one hand and pressed the bag with the other. That wasn't included in the price, brat. He slid the drawer closed, then peered up with narrowed eyes. This undetectable extension bag is worth 15 sickles. The money you just paid doesn't cover it. If you want to take it, add another 7 sickles. Rogge fished out another galleon, slammed it on the counter, and picked an old wand out of the pen holder. How stingy, he said with a curl of sarcasm. Keep the change. He shoved the wand into his pack and walked out of Elvin's second-hand shop without looking back. Elvin stroked his beard, feeling like he'd won. Then he remembered. The old wand Rogge had taken was a vintage piece, worth at least 1.5 galleons. Not only had he failed to make the boy pay more, he'd lost an undetectable extension bag. Regret prickled, but Rogge was already striding away. You wait, brat, Elvin muttered after him. Next time I'll give you a 120% discount. Still, he'd made a small profit and could console himself on that. Wands and textbooks were sorted. Now all that was left was a pet. Rogue glanced toward Gringotts at the intersection of Diagon Alley. The commotion from Quirrell's incident had escalated. Ministry aurors were even present, and the crowd around the Owl Emporium made it unappealing. He turned instead toward the magical zoo beside it. Stepping inside, he was dazzled. Phoenix feathers and curved eagle beaks hung on the walls. A magical eye bobbed in a slim-necked bottle on the counter. Unlike the owl shop, this place gathered a menagerie of bizarre creatures. In a glass case, a greenish fire-dwelling salamander spat tiny flames. In a nearby tank, silverfish and green, finned grindylows darted through water. A purple acromantula dozed on its web high on the wooden ceiling. In one corner, a pile of crooked horns, striped silver, white, and brown yellow, sat in a heap. "These are horns of a flying stag, very valuable," the assistant said when he caught Rogue's puzzlement. "Flying stags can soar. Their horns can be made into wands and are useful in potion making." "You must be a new Hogwarts student, aren't you?" The assistant smiled and pointed at the animals. "First years need a pet. Would you like to take a look?" He was friendly and patient, quite a contrast to Elvin. Rogue nodded. He scanned the owls perched on stands, then the cats lounging in baskets. "Why are only 3 kinds of animals allowed?" he asked, curious. The assistant considered and explained, "Mainly for student safety, and because these animals are easy to care for. Hogwarts is in the Scottish Highlands, far from many homes. Owls help deliver letters and are useful companions. Cats and toads are small and quiet, so they won't disturb others. Cats also provide warmth and companionship. Toad mucus is actually a helpful potion ingredient. Also, these 3 are relatively low maintenance. The school needs students to focus on learning magic." Rogue blinked. "I want to buy an owl and a cat." The assistant looked surprised. "Aren't first years only allowed 1 pet?" "Of course." Rogue smiled faintly. He wasn't choosing 2 for himself. He was buying the extra for Jessica. For 11 years, Rogue had been by Jessica's side. In September, he would start at Hogwarts, and Jessica would be left at home. They could use owls to write, but he didn't want her to be lonely. A cat could keep her company. The assistant's expression softened when he heard that. "I understand," he said quietly. "Come with me. Let me show you our owls and cats." He pushed open a small door, and Rogue stepped into a world that looked nothing like a cramped shop. Sunlight streamed in. Fresh air stirred the leaves of full-grown trees. A gentle river flowed past banks of flowering plants. Magical creatures wandered free in the hidden space, clearly an undetectable extension charm at work. "No wonder it's called the Magical Zoo," Rogue murmured, stunned despite the 2 lives he had already lived. "This space was expanded with an undetectable extension charm so we can care for all kinds of creatures," the assistant said. "Follow me. The owl area is this way." They moved through lush foliage until they reached the owl enclosure. Dozens of owls of all shapes and sizes perched on branches, blinking curiously at the new guest. "This is a long-eared owl from Eastern Europe, strong and hardy. It can fly in blizzards," the assistant said, indicating a pale gray owl with long tufts on its head. 12 galleons. Chapter 16. Diana and Yumi. Over there is an imported snowy owl, very beautiful and rare. 15 galleons. The clerk pointed to another owl perched high on a branch. Roger examined both birds carefully, but he was especially captivated by the snowy owl's elegant feathers and light, poised stance. Its round face and golden eyes seemed full of mystery. "The snowy owl looks lovely and intelligent," Roger said. "Can it adapt to Scotland's climate? I'm worried it won't stand the winter storms of the Highlands." "Don't worry, all our owls go through strict breeding and adaptability training." The clerk called the snowy owl over. "They can adapt to harsh environments." Roger reached out his hand. The owl, perched on the clerk's arm, cocked its head and pecked gently at his fingers, curious. As Roger was deciding, another owl suddenly flew out from deep inside the shop. Its feathers shone like silver metal as it circled the tree a few times and then settled on the highest branch. A pair of vertical golden pupils glowed faintly, beautiful and majestic. "This is a nightingale owl, extremely rare," the clerk said, noticing Roger's interest. "Legend says it brings good luck to its owner on a full moon night." From the moment he saw it, Roger couldn't take his eyes off the bird. Its shimmering form had captured his heart instantly. "I want it," he said, looking up with resolve and affection at the proud nightingale owl. Of course, but the price. The clerk hesitated. Nightingale owls are rare throughout the magical world. They cost 120 galleons. Child, I know you like it, but you ought to think twice. If you really want to buy it, it's best to have a parent present. The clerk glanced at Roger's eager expression. He wasn't the first to fall for the nightingale owl. Most adult wizards were put off by the price. There was normally no need to spend 120 galleons on an owl. Don't worry, I won't return it. I'm buying it in the name of the Travis family. Roger said the name plainly. He would not miss such a magnificent creature. The clerk's expression changed when he heard Travis. Given the wealth and reputation of the old pure-blood Travis family, this thin boy in front of him was clearly not bluffing. All right then, I'll have someone bring the nightingale owl down. Sir, let's go over to the desk and complete the paperwork first. He added, owls live a long time. Choosing one is a responsibility. With the Travis family's resources, this little creature will certainly be well cared for. Of course. Roger followed the clerk back to the counter. After a brief, friendly negotiation, the magical menagerie agreed to sell the nightingale owl for 100 galleons. Roger carefully read and signed the magical pet adoption agreement, then emptied half of his gold coins from a small leather pouch under the clerk's watchful eye. Moments later, a staff member carried the silver-white nightingale owl down. It stood proudly on its perch, its golden eyes fixed on its new owner. Please guide me, Diana, Roger murmured as he reached out and stroked the bird's soft feathers. A warm, indescribable affection welled up in him. Diana, after the Roman moon goddess, seemed the perfect name. Sir, this comes with a nabag. The clerk produced a worn handbag. It's not as remarkable as Newt Scander's magical animal case, but it will do for caring for a small number of magical creatures. Nabag? Newt Scamander? Roger blinked. This was the second time he'd heard the name. He took the leather bag and examined it. It looked old, but Roger noticed intricate patterns that hinted at something more. You might not know, but Newt Scamander is a famous magizoologist, the clerk explained. He has an undetectable extension case that can hold many different magical creatures. This nabag is the same idea, just on a much smaller scale. Like the magical space behind that wooden door we saw earlier? Yes, essentially the same, the clerk smiled. A nabag is a wonderful magical item. It lets you carry and care for animals wherever you go. It might make you a magizoologist like Newt someday. The clerk encouraged him and taught Roger how to use the nabag. Think of it as a magical version of a Pokeball. In a short while, Roger learned to operate the nabag. With Diana's consent, he gently coaxed her into the bag. Then, accompanied by the clerk, he went to choose another pet, a ragdoll kitten about a month old, with large crystal blue eyes, lively and adorable. How about I name you Yumi? Roger said happily, choosing the name to commemorate his AFK support career from his previous life. Yumi was still too young. Roger didn't want to put her in the nabag. The clerk produced a pink pet backpack and helped Roger settle Yumi inside. The kitten nestled comfortably and peered out through the small hemispherical window at the top. After paying another 5 galleons, Roger signed up for a lifetime membership at the magical menagerie. Sir, these are complimentary pet food and toys to help them grow healthy and happy. The clerk handed him another bag, smiling. Roger took it with a wry grin. He strode out of the shop with the nabag in his right hand, the pink pet backpack on his chest, the complimentary food and toys in his left, and the larger, undetectable extension bag, the one he had snatched from Elvin, on his back. The clerk waved him off with a mix of reluctance and enthusiasm. Roger didn't know that less than half a day after he left Diagon Alley, news of the Travis family's little wizard spending a fortune on a nightingale owl had spread through the street. 100 galleons, enough to match an Auror's monthly wage, was the kind of sum that made wizards talk. A few steps from the menagerie, outside a second-hand shop, Elvin tugged at his beard when he heard the news. That blasted little rascal, so rich, and he still haggles with me over a few nuts, he muttered. Next time, I'll empty your pockets of every gold coin, someone called after him. Roger stood outside Gringotts, looking for Professor McGonagall, while wizards nearby gossiped about the attempted theft. Even though Gringotts insisted the thief had not succeeded, everyone had something to say. This was Gringotts, after all. The goblins boasted it was the safest place in the wizarding world. Sarah, who would be bold enough to use magic in a Gringotts vault? A passerby asked. Perhaps it was a former Death Eater. Sarah, a plump witch craning her neck to see inside, suggested. Only goblins and aurors were now visible, bustling about. I heard from my great-uncle's sister-in-law's third cousin's aunt that there was an explosion inside just now, Sarah said, turning to George with absolute conviction. Chapter 17. Disappointed Madame Malkin. Oh my, an explosion? Did they blow the vault door? George's eyes widened. Weren't the goblins saying the thief failed? Tsk, official statements are hardly ever reliable, Sarah replied. She leaned in close and lowered her voice. The thief did open the vault, but the owner had already removed the contents earlier. That's why the thief failed. Rogge listened to the rich alto and wondered how anyone thought that sounded like a whisper. Still, the witch's words reminded him of the story he knew. When Hagrid brought Harry Potter to Diagon Alley, he had encountered Professor Quirrell, wrapped in a turban, at the leaky cauldron. It was better to keep away from such trouble. As she said, Hagrid had already saved the Philosopher's Stone once, leaving Quirrell empty-handed and nearly caught by the goblins. The stone, granting immortality and turning lead into gold, had been created by someone who lived an extraordinarily long time and whose name was awkward to pronounce. If the stone were in front of him, Rogge thought frankly he would be tempted to take it. Who wouldn't want eternal life? He made a mental note. Study alchemy after enrolling. Images from a life he'd read about flashed across his mind. Lord Voldemort, Quirrell, Dumbledore, Harry, and the three-headed pet dog. Professor McGonagall! Professor McGonagall! Rogge spotted her in the crowd and waved, dragging his bag. McGonagall's eyes lit up when she saw Yumi tucked in his backpack. She glanced at the bulging sacks and sighed. Rogge, you look like you've done quite a bit of shopping, she said. Next time, make a list before you go. Don't take everything Elvin tells you to buy. Rogge smiled defensively. I didn't buy much at the second-hand shop. Most of it was at the magical menagerie. McGonagall gave him a look that said she didn't entirely believe him, then softened. It's fine. Just be more discerning next time. She took one of his bags and steered him toward Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions. Such a small cat needs careful attention. When you get to Hogwarts, you can learn more about magical creatures from Hagrid. Hagrid, is he as good as Newt? Rogge asked. He'd heard of Newt Scamander's reputation, but knew little about him. Newt is an old friend, an excellent magizoologist, McGonagall said with a faraway smile. Hagrid is remarkable in his own right. From a young age, he's had a special affinity for creatures. Under his guidance, you'll learn a great deal. They pushed open the door of the robe shop. Madame Malkin greeted them with a broad smile and produced a black robe. Come and try it on. I guarantee this will fit perfectly. She pointed to a chair for his bags and set to work fitting him. What a handsome young man. I'll wager the girls at Hogwarts won't be able to keep their eyes off you. Madame Malkin crowed as she perched a pointed wizard's hat on his head and draped the cloak around him. Rogge straightened instinctively before the mirror. The craftsmanship was impeccable. No wonder little wizards from all over came to her for school robes. Something's missing, Madame Malkin said, frowning and then brightening. Ah, of course, a tie! She rummaged through a rack and held up a slim silver-green tie. McGonagall hesitated when she saw it, then dismissed the thought. The sorting hat would decide houses soon enough. The robe fit him perfectly. Despite his slight frame, the full uniform and tie transformed him. There was a certain presence about him that McGonagall found hard to put into words. Perhaps it was the years he'd lost, the time he'd been wrongly imprisoned in Azkaban as a child. There was a calmness about him that hinted at depth, like a still ocean concealing a brewing storm. It fits beautifully. I knew my robes would be perfect, Madame Malkin said, pleased. Then she offered, if you let us use your photo for advertising, I'll give you all your school clothes for free. A full set, summer and winter robes, plus dragonhide gloves, would normally cost at least 30 galleons. For most magical families, that was a considerable sum, and the materials on Rogge's uniform were clearly superior to the standard mannequins. Madame Malkin, your work is wonderful, Rogge said, declining the offer. I'll pay the full price. Madame Malkin looked disappointed, but respectful of his decision. You are too kind to offer your photo just for me, then? I can't have it used publicly, Rogge said, but I'll give you a photo just for you personally. Oh, my dear, that's very sweet. Madame Malkin hugged him, beaming. Seeing children happily wearing the uniforms I make is my greatest joy. I'll treasure the photo. When I get to school, I'll take more and send them to you, Rogge promised. Splendid. It's a deal, Madame Malkin said, and she and Rogge high-fived to seal it. She produced a magical photograph of him in full uniform to keep and waved them off with the absurd fond pride of a woman who truly loved her work. I look forward to your letters and pictures. It's getting late. We should head to Gringotts, McGonagall reminded them. Rogge hoisted another bag. McGonagall took some of the weight from him. Isn't Gringotts sealed off? Rogge asked as they stepped back into the street. Only temporarily, McGonagall said. To a goblin, losing a minute of business is like losing 1,000 galleons. They'll be furious, but they'll manage. She grumbled good-naturedly at the goblins' passion for gold as they hurried away toward the bank. Chapter 18, Vault Number 1111. As Professor McGonagall had predicted, Gringotts had reopened, and whatever had happened during the theft earlier did not seem to have fazed the goblins. Let's go open an account, she said as they walked, explaining the precautions to Rogge. Every new student has a vault and a corresponding key at Gringotts. The smaller a vault's serial number, the older it is, and the more secretive it tends to be. Wizards can store money and valuables in their vaults, and they can remit funds through goblins to Gringotts branches around the world, but all of this is done under goblin supervision. At that moment, the street lamps along Diagon Alley brightened, and McGonagall led Rogge toward the gleaming facade of Gringotts. The bronze doors shone. Goblins in scarlet and gold uniforms bowed to customers along the counters. Rogge glanced up at the silver door on the second level, where the warning was engraved in neat script. Enter, stranger, but beware of greed. The whole building was undoubtedly riddled with undetectable extension charms. Inside, Gringotts buzzed with activity, in contrast to the muffled quiet of Diagon Alley outside. Dozens of goblins sat behind counters, processing transactions with precise, efficient movements. Parchments stamped with magical seals floated through the air under their direction. In the center of the main hall, minecarts waited to be shunted to the vaults, piled high with coins and glittering gems. Move along, please. There are others waiting, a goblin with a ledger called, and the wizards in line edged forward. Nearby, a spectacled goblin examined gemstones with meticulous scrutiny. Another weighed ingots of gold on a small scale. This gold, sometimes recovered from ancient tombs, carried the chill of death. Curse breakers from across the world sent such items to Gringotts to be purified and cast into galleons. Forda, is the transfer slip filled out? One goblin asked. Almost, came the reply from a goblin without looking up. The hall rang with the clink of coins, the goblins' calls, and the rustle of parchment, a busy, precise symphony. Rogge watched it all, and a mischievous thought crossed his mind. What if he could sneak into a vault? In the original story, Quirrell, Harry, and others had managed to break into Gringotts' underground vaults. The goblins' defenses were not quite as infallible as they professed. Rogge, it's our turn, McGonagall reminded him. He took out his acceptance letter. Welcome, Professor McGonagall, said the goblin behind the high counter. A new student from Hogwarts. I expect you'll be opening your vault before long. The goblin, Gilderoy, took the acceptance letter, examined it carefully, attached an agreement, and handed it over. Rogge read the agreement, signed with a quill, and Gilderoy admired the neat handwriting. Beautiful cursive. Mr. Rogge Travis, congratulations on opening a Gringotts account. From now on, you may deposit and withdraw through Gringotts banks worldwide. He stamped the agreement solemnly. This is your key. Please keep it safe. He handed over a small golden key stamped with the numbers 11 and 11. It meant Rogge's vault sat on the 11th floor, vault number 11. Would you like to see the vault? Thank you, not today. Rogge patted his pockets. He didn't have much left. You can put even one nut in a vault, Mr. Travis, Gilderoy said, eyes bright, listening for the jingle of coins. Next time, then, Rogge replied. He couldn't help wishing for something like a bewitched backpack or a reliable digital storage enchantment, anything to keep his valuables safe without having to lug them around. They left Gringotts and returned to the Leaky Cauldron. Although he hadn't seen Harry Potter or Professor Quirrell, the stories about them seemed to be everywhere in Diagon Alley. "Mr. Rogge, we had an agreement," McGonagall said as they stepped out. "Oh, my wand, of course." Reluctantly, Rogge handed his wand to McGonagall, face apologetic. He worried inwardly that she might discover the older wand hidden in his backpack. "Don't worry, you'll get it back once school starts," she said. She took the wand, gave it a gentle grip, and the entire wand transformed into a tiny vortex and vanished at her waist. Underage wizards' wands are traced. If magic is used in prohibited places, the ministry will be notified by the trace. And do not perform magic in front of muggles. She knew Rogge could do wandless magic and cautioned him firmly against misusing it. McGonagall was confident he would master his school spells before term began. "Don't worry, Professor. I promise not to cause trouble," Rogge said quickly. McGonagall nodded. Today he had struck her as steady, independent, and a likable little wizard. Still, she worried about their current lodgings. They were staying in a ward of the Malfoy household. Lucius Malfoy, a committed Death Eater with extreme pure-blood views, and that was far from ideal. She hoped the ministry's compensation would come through quickly so Rogge and his mother could move out. Back at St. Mungo's, Jessica beamed at the sight of the many bags her son had brought back. She felt a pang of regret that she hadn't been able to accompany him to Diagon Alley. "Quick, Rogge, put on your school robe so Mum can see," she said, cradling Yumi and saying nothing about the owl, Diana, which looked expensive. Rogge changed into the robes Madame Malkin had made, turned in a little circle, and Jessica nodded, tears springing to her eyes. "My son, a little wizard. When I go to Hogwarts, Yumi will stay with you. If you miss me, Diana can send me letters," Rogge said. "Good, good." Jessica hugged him tightly, wishing she had a camera to capture the moment. The smell of new cloth soothed her. For the first time in days, she felt a small calm about the Wizengamot hearing tomorrow. The Wizengamot is an ancient court under the Ministry of Magic, and in recent years it had grown more independent, cultivating a reputation for solemnity and impartiality. The circular hall, built of dark gray megaliths, lay deep beneath London. Two aurors opened the heavy doors, and an atmosphere of age and gravity swept over them. "Please follow me." An auror led Jessica and Rogge to the center of the chamber. This was a special hearing. Suspended in the middle of the hall hung a spiked cage. Inside was a somewhat oversized chair. Jessica sat with her son and told him to put on the protective mask they'd been given. Rogge leaned against his mother's arm and looked around with curiosity. Tiered seating circled the hall, and the walls faintly reflected candlelight, scattering it over wizards in their flowing purple robes who arrived one by apparition. They regarded Jessica and her son with a mixture of curiosity and quiet concern. Chapter 19. Trial of the Wizengamot. In the heart of the stone chamber, a tall, gilded judgment chair stood like an altar to law, its age and dignity recalling the countless secrets and crimes that had been judged there. Albus Dumbledore, his half-moon spectacles perched on his nose, sat behind the pile of files on the dais. Around him sat many old acquaintances, summoned for what promised to be a trial of enormous consequence. Below the high seat, the Wizengamot scribes hovered with quills, recording every word that would become part of the permanent record of magical jurisprudence. Before long, all 50 members of the Wizengamot had taken their places, a rare attendance for a hearing concerning dark wizards. Outside the great doors, a crush of reporters pressed for space, eager for the next scoop. "The last time it felt this grand was right after the war," someone muttered. Dumbledore rapped the gavel. His voice, seasoned by years, rolled over the chamber. Silence. The room obeyed. "The accused, Jessica Travis, is present. Will the prosecution begin?" From the ministry benches rose a young black wizard named Theodore. He had entered the Department of Magical Law Enforcement just 3 years earlier and had risen quickly to the role of prosecutor. He drew a breath, steadied himself, and addressed the Wizengamot. "Wizards of the Wizengamot." At that moment, a small voice rang out from the defense table. "Mom, who is the suspect? And what's a defendant? Who's you-know-who?" The question came from Rogge Travis, Jessica's son. His childish interruption paused Theodore mid-sentence. He faltered, then looked up, stung. Dumbledore tapped the gavel. Order. The prosecution may continue. Jessica put a finger to her lips, and Rogge nodded. The interruption had been a calculated break in the rhythm, a child's barbed innocence deflecting the prosecution's attempt to paint his mother as a monstrous Death Eater. Theodore recovered. He strode to the center of the courtroom and opened a file. A stack of booklets, copies of ministry records, had been prepared for distribution. Because all 50 members were present, he had been forced to use a Gemino charm on the spot to duplicate enough copies, a fact he would regret in a moment. He waved his wand, and the files landed in the hands of the jurors, but few bothered to look through them. Growing impatient, he thrust a document forward and called, "Please read these." The Travis couple participated in the rise of you-know-who. They committed murder, including the killing of Bana, kidnapped members of the Evans family, set fire to a ministry institution, disrupted Quidditch matches, illegally used Imperius on Muggles, and more. These actions are grave breaches of the Statute of Secrecy and the prohibition on unforgivable curses. Silence, a few scoffs, and a palpable coolness met his accusations. "Why aren't you reading the booklets?" he demanded. Dumbledore lifted his hand. "Does the prosecution have anything further?" From the defense table rose Albert King. Calm and measured, he had spent 2 decades as a prosecutor in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement before opening his own practice. A former classmate of Draco Malfoy, he was pleased to accept this high-profile case. He addressed the court. "I asked the Wizengamot to put aside any prejudices and examine the facts." He cocked an eyebrow at the copies in the jurors' hands. "First, the authenticity of the ministry documents produced by the prosecution must be verified. We request the originals." Theodore, unprepared for the call, instinctively produced the very files he'd been using. "The originals are here," he said. Albert's expression turned triumphant. "Ministry originals are warded against illicit duplication. If these copies were conjured to meet attendance, their counter-charms would be compromised, and the documents lose legal weight." Theodore's face tightened. He realized his mistake. Hastily duplicated files cast doubt upon their validity. "Secondly," Albert continued, "the prosecution alleges that Madame Jessica actively joined the Death Eaters. Produce evidence." He passed an original document across the bench to Dumbledore, Rogge Travis's birth certificate. Jessica's maiden name is Jessica Lestrange. She graduated from Hufflepuff, then worked in France. She returned to Britain in 1979 and married Theodore Travis. Rogge was born in 1980. She became pregnant almost immediately after marriage. An indignant shout rose from the prosecution, and an objection was called. Dumbledore let the gavel fall. Objection overruled. Albert's voice remained steady as he drove his point home. "Tell me, members of the Wizengamot, would a woman who was expecting a child willingly enter the ranks of you-know-who? Or is it far more likely that she and her husband were coerced into service? Madame Travis spent 11 years in Azkaban surrounded by Dementors and yet managed to keep her child alive. Her actions as a mother are plain to see. She has expressed deep regret for any past affiliations." Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the chamber. One juror leaned forward. "Her gaunt appearance alone speaks to the horror she survived." 11 years in Azkaban, another agreed. "A pitiful child and a mother who protected him." Albert let the mood settle. "We lived through an extraordinary time. Lives were twisted by war. We cannot judge ordinary people by wartime standards. I submit there is reasonable doubt." One by one, the 50 members raised their wands and cast a green spark of assent. 50 green lights blossomed across the ancient stone amphitheater, a rare, unanimous vote. Dumbledore set the gavel down with weight. "The Wizengamot finds Jessica Travis not guilty. As of today, all her rights as a witch are reinstated." Warm applause burst from the benches and galleries. Jessica folded Rogge into an embrace, tears streaming down her face. The court rose in tribute to the mother and son who had endured so much. Only Theodore remained seated, shoulders slumped. When he had accepted the case, his superiors had promised him a triple promotion and the prospect of advancing toward director. Now all those ambitions lay in ashes. The ministry officials who had accompanied him clapped out of duty, but unease tightened their faces. The Wizengamot's verdict declared that Jessica and her late husband had been coerced by you-know-who's followers and were not morally or legally culpable in the way the prosecution had alleged. The courtroom slowly dispersed, the echoes of the verdict lingering in the stone, while outside the reporters jostled for the first words of the freed witch and her son. Chapter 20. Lucius's Ambition. Because Theodore was dead, compensation for him was trivial, and the Ministry of Magic wasn't especially concerned about paying for the dead. But Jessica and Rogge were alive, imprisoned in Azkaban for 11 years, and the scandal's magnitude meant the Ministry would be forced to pay a serious sum to settle it. One day later, the Ministry of Magic and the Wizengamot issued a formal resolution regarding the wrongful imprisonment of Jessica Travis and her son. They declared that Jessica and Theodore Travis had been coerced by you-know-who into joining the Death Eaters during the Wizarding War. Since neither had committed major crimes, their status as Death Eaters would no longer be pursued. The Ministry also announced it had reached a compensation agreement with the Travis family, and at the request of the parties involved, the terms would remain confidential. The resolution ordered substantive reforms to Azkaban, significantly reduced the number and power of Dementors, increased the number of wizarding staff to avoid relying on Dementors to subdue prisoners, add psychological counselors to help prisoners reform and facilitate reintegration, prioritizing those wrongfully imprisoned, establish an independent prisoners' rights committee to inspect Azkaban and safeguard basic living conditions, accelerate appeal reviews and release those proven innocent or clearly unjustly sentenced, and consider humanitarian measures, including appropriate sentence reductions for genuinely repentant prisoners already convicted. The Ministry pledged a comprehensive review of Azkaban's management to make treatment of prisoners more humane and fair. During the investigation, the Ministry found that the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the court had bypassed legal procedures and engaged in vigilante behavior. Because it had been wartime and Aurors had certain emergency powers, the Ministry issued resolutions for relevant personnel. Barty Crouch would be demoted. Responsible personnel in the Ministry's courtroom would be held to account. Internal supervision would be strengthened with clearer boundaries on officials' powers to prevent abuses. The disciplinary inspection system would be improved, particularly in departments affecting life and liberty. A public complaints channel would be opened so citizens could appeal and supervise improper enforcement. Regular training on law enforcement regulations and procedures would be required for all Ministry staff. And psychological counseling for law enforcement officers would be strengthened to prevent extreme behavior. The Ministry committed to internal rectification to prevent such dereliction of duty and malpractice happening again. Rogge and Jessica paid little heed to the Ministry's pronouncements beyond the fact that they had been officially declared innocent. The compensation agreement had already been drafted and handed to them through Dumbledore, and out of respect for the headmaster, Jessica didn't contest the draft. The compensation offered the Travis family included economic compensation, 100,000 galleons to Rogge Travis and 300,000 galleons to Jessica Travis. In-kind compensation, return of all Travis family properties, land, and estates in Britain, plus a high-end apartment in central London for Rogge and Jessica. Educational compensation, waiver of Rogge's 7 years of Hogwarts tuition and living expenses, and a full scholarship for study abroad at a top magical school. Medical compensation, free lifelong high-end magical medical services for both and 5 years of regular psychological counseling, extendable as needed. Employment placement, job opportunities suited to Jessica's background and active recommendation for Rogge to apply for a Ministry post after graduation. Other compensation, a public apology in major wizarding papers. The agreement was sincere in intent, but still needed negotiation on some details. Rogge watched Jessica sign, feeling a rising wariness toward Albus Dumbledore, the respected headmaster and influential member of the Wizengamot. He sensed that even Dumbledore had his own motives. He leaned against Jessica's arm, uneasy. "Congratulations," Draco Malfoy declared, visibly pleased. The fallout had benefited him greatly. "It's a pity the evidence that Buck killed the McKinnon family is conclusive, otherwise he could have been released." Many members of the pureblood families had their positions restored, and more would gradually be freed from Azkaban. As the pureblood houses regained power, Malfoy's prestige increased. With you-know-who presumed dead, Malfoy found himself in a subtly leading position among pureblood wizards. Flush with new influence, he was carried away by ambition and began to talk of forming an exclusive organization for pureblood families. He had even thought of a name, the Ancient Magic Alliance. According to him, it would focus on protecting wizarding bloodlines and pureblood interests. Ancient magic represents the past glory of the wizarding world, he told them. Through this alliance, we can unite the strength of pureblood families and search out lost ancient magic. He believed that reclaiming ancient magic would restore wizarding supremacy. Malfoy had been reading about muggles and, for once, set aside some of his old arrogance. He had reluctantly acknowledged that modern wizards no longer held an absolute advantage. A muggle could destroy a city with a single bomb in a way that wizards could not easily prevent. That imbalance of power threatened status, and as a pureblood Malfoy swore he would not allow wizards to be trampled. Recovering ancient magic, he insisted, was the solution. Once ancient magic is recovered, Malfoy said, eyes shining with fervor, the status of pureblood wizards will surely rise again. Madam Jessica, considering that the heritage of our pureblood families is being eroded, I'm thinking of creating an organization that only pureblood families can join, Malfoy continued. Uncle Malfoy, will the alliance only include purebloods? Rogge asked, curious. Absolutely, Malfoy replied. Only our families have persisted from the age of ancient magic to the present. Only we have preserved the bloodline of ancient magic. Who else would be qualified? That would make the rest of the wizarding world suspicious of us, Rogge countered. If we really limit membership to pure bloods, given how sensitive things are now, we'll face widespread opposition. Rogge suggested an alternative: recruit by merit, exceptional skill in spellcraft, potion-making, and other disciplines, while keeping the Alliance's core leadership among pureblood families. The more members the Alliance had, he argued, the greater the power of those core figures. Confronted with Rogge's analysis, Malfoy admitted the point was valid, though he was embarrassed to confess he hadn't worked out the details yet. Unable to think of a good answer, he excused himself, saying he had business at home, and left quickly. Rogge watched Malfoy go, sighing. I already have a plan for you, he murmured to himself. All right, go to bed early. We have to move tomorrow. Jessica said as she put away the ministry documents. She could see that if Rogge stayed close to Malfoy, trouble would follow sooner or later. Tomorrow? Rogge was surprised. He'd wanted to discuss more with Uncle Malfoy. Yes. Don't let the agreement list the house as being in London, and then wait. If we delay, the ministry might find a way to wriggle out of it. Strike while the iron is hot. Don't let them procrastinate. Now go and rest.